I have created scientific magic. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 251, Professional Rebel Redel. Rupert soon noticed the actions of the miners, and his face suddenly became gloomy. He swung his long whip and hit one of them, and shouted, "What are you looking at? Get back to work." The onlookers hesitated for a moment, but still picked up their pickaxes again, carried the stones, and continued to dig. Rupert then turned his eyes back and looked at Redel viciously. If the other party had not known some medical skills and could save the Baron a sum of money, such a thorn would have been killed by him long ago. However, after a little thought, Rupert soon came up with an idea and showed a playful smile on his face. "It's not impossible for me to spare him, but the output of ore mined this week must be increased by another 10%. You choose." Rupert smiled grimly. Redel gritted his teeth and was extremely angry, but Ham was seriously injured and his body was torn apart. If he didn't receive treatment, he might really not be able to hold on, so he could only nod and agree. "By the way, you guys will have to make up for his work today, otherwise you won't have dinner later," Rupert said loudly to ensure that every miner present could hear him. The miners who were originally standing on Redel's side couldn't help but complain in their hearts, and many of them secretly blamed Redel for meddling in other people's business. The tasks that Rupert had assigned to them before were already extremely heavy, and increasing the output by 10% would simply cost them their lives. Redel didn't dare to look at the eyes of the crowd. He took out the herbs from his pocket and simply treated Ham's injuries. The rest could only be left to fate. Then Redel didn't stop at all, picked up the pickaxe, and worked harder than anyone else. There were thousands of miners in this mining area. Although Ham was missing, with Redel leading the way, everyone worked hard to have dinner. Rupert didn't dare to really starve these people for a night because of this little thing. If he delayed the ore mining work tomorrow, he would still be scolded. After a busy day, most of the miners received their dinner, a piece of black bread and soup made from wheat leaves. It was not nutritious at all and was even hard to swallow, but every miner ate it very quickly. The heavy physical work had made them careless about other things and just wanted to stuff food into their stomachs. Anything edible was a rare delicacy in their eyes. However, Rupert was very stingy. The food he gave was not enough to fill their stomachs. It could only barely keep them from starving to death. Some miners who were starving even dug up grass roots on the ground. Ham, who was lazy just now, naturally did not get any food. Redel, who was reluctant, had to share his share. Ham had taken care of him when he first came to this mine, so Redel naturally could not leave it alone. The finely chopped wheat leaves mixed with the black soup slowly poured into Ham's mouth, allowing the seriously injured man to recover a little strength. But facing the black bread handed over by Redel, he shook his head and refused. "I'll just eat this." Redel opened his bag, which was filled with unknown herbs. "This is Suzuki grass, which is much better than the hard-to-chew black bread." Ham then reached out to take the small piece of black bread and began to eat it voraciously. If he didn't eat more, he might not survive tonight. Redel watched Ham eat while stuffing the Suzuki grass in the bag into his mouth. The leaves of this grass were very bitter. He didn't know whether it was edible or not, but since it could heal external injuries, it must be non-toxic. In any case, it was better than being hungry. Ham quickly stuffed all the black bread into his mouth, licked the breadcrumbs that fell on his hands, and then tremblingly held the holy light mark made of wood hanging on his chest with his right hand, and began to pray devoutly, telling the great Lord of the stars and the moon goddess, Ella, about his sins and sufferings, and begging the other party to bless him to survive tonight. "Uncle Ham, does prayer really work?" Redel couldn't help asking. There were quite a few miners who believed in the goddess, Ella, throughout the mine, but many devout believers also died in the last mining accident, which made Redel feel extremely puzzled. If the goddess really existed and was as sacred and merciful as people said, why didn't she protect her believers? "It works, it will work," Ham said like a dream. "This is all the test of the great Lord for you and me. The suffering we suffer in this life will sublimate our souls and return to the Lord's kingdom after death. Otherwise, We will fall into the boundless hell after death, and be forever sunk in the cooking of fire and hot oil. Ham said in fear. He didn't know if the suffering he had suffered was enough, and he didn't know whether his piety could move the great goddess, Ella, but survival was an instinct, and prayer was the only thing he could do. For slaves like them who lost their homes due to war and famine, were caught in the mines, and had no future, they could only hope to enter the kingdom of God after death and enjoy eternal happiness. Retta looked confused. He had heard similar remarks more than once, but he was more and more confused. However, the guards of the mine did not give them a chance to talk in detail. They waved their long whips and drove the miners to sleep quickly. It was forbidden to talk to each other in the middle of the night, and they only had 5 hours of rest time. Rettel had to suppress his doubts in his heart and lay on the bed made of grass leaves. The fatigue brought by a day of hard work in mining ore soon made him fall asleep. About half an hour later, a guard holding a torch, while no one was around, put a delicate ring on Rettel's hand. At the same time, in the dean's office in Yayata Harbor, Lin En also received Rettel's message at the same time. A young man who knew a little about herbs and had a rebellious spirit had accumulated some prestige among many miners. The problem is that he is too young and inexperienced to stir up any trouble, but people can be trained. Lin En touched his chin. Since the magic field can mimic the microcosm, it should not be a problem to reproduce some classic historical scenes according to the computing power of the intelligent brain. There are too many, such as the Yellow Turban Uprising, the Wagang Uprising, and the Huangjiao Uprising. Just like playing a game, it can quickly turn a person into a professional rebel. Lin En retrieved the information of various peasant army uprisings in history and started to read them. He would first give him a magic version of the day's Xian Uprising. Chapter 252. Do you want a book hidden in a fish's belly, a wild fox howling at night, or a strange phenomenon falling from the sky? In a daze, Rettel had an extremely strange dream. He dreamed that he had become another person, a poor farmhand of a huge empire, and was conscripted to guard the border of Yueyang. Wake up, wake up! A burst of urgent shouts reached his ears. Rettel opened his eyes sleepily and saw a bearded man in front of him. Wu Guang. Rettel's mind suddenly appeared the other person's name. This was his good brother, a trustworthy person. Because of their outstanding abilities, the two were temporarily promoted to the position of garrison chief, assisting the officers of the Qin dynasty to escort 900 civilians to guard the border of Yueyang, and his name seemed to be Chensheng. Rettel looked confused. In fact, he felt extremely unfamiliar with these two names, but in his dream, he had long forgotten everything before. Rettel hesitated for a long time until the other party called his name repeatedly, and then he came back to his senses. Looking at the dim sky and continuous heavy rain outside the station, he asked in confusion, "What's wrong, Brother Wu? Are you going to set off again before dawn?" "No, I just got some very bad news." Wu Guang sighed. Due to the continuous heavy rain in recent days, the road ahead has been blocked by fallen rocks and muddy water. Even if we take a detour, it will not be enough to reach Yueyang within a month. Alas, Qin law has always been strict. If you exceed the deadline and fail to guard the border, you will be beheaded according to the law. I'm afraid that you and I will have to give up our lives. Hearing this, Rettel was also shocked. He didn't understand the so-called Qin law at all. He didn't even fully understand why he was here. There were only some vague memories in his mind, but he had a natural closeness to the man in front of him. His good brothers would not deceive him. In other words, they will die soon. The fear of death suddenly surged into Rettel's heart, but he was more at a loss. Listen to me, good brother, since dying early or late is death, why don't we just go all out and rebel against him? Wu Guang said passionately. The tyrannical Qin dynasty built a lot of buildings and fought wars for years, forcing us poor people to suffer. Now that Zhulong is dead, the second emperor has succeeded to the throne, and he is even more brutal. He even conspired to kill Prince Fusu, who should have succeeded to the throne. Who in the world can accept this? Now if you and I raise an army, we will definitely get a lot of support and build a great cause. For the sake of the people of the world, for the lives of all the brothers, for our wealth and glory, let's give it a try. Today, Wu Guang patted Rettel hard and said excitedly. Although Rettel didn't understand at all, The blood in his heart had been completely mobilized. He still understood one thing: since he was going to die anyway, he might as well fight him directly. However, this kind of blood only existed for a short moment. As an honest child, Riddle dared to resist the supervisor with a momentary anger, but he had no experience in rebellion, so he could only ask Wu Wang for help weakly. "But, what should we do?" "Don't worry, I have arranged everything," Wu Wang said confidently, and stuffed a roll of white silk into his hand. "Tomorrow when you go out fishing, you think of a way to stuff it into the fish's belly." Riddle took the white silk carefully, and then he found that it was actually written with a few big words in red paint like blood: Da Chu Xing, Chen Sheng Wang. Riddle was completely dumbfounded. He remembered that his name seemed to be Chen Sheng. This, isn't this a bit bad? How about you do it?" However, Wu Wang didn't give Riddle a chance to shirk, and immediately offered a strange plan called "Books in the Fish's Belly." Honest Riddle didn't expect that the uprising could be played like this. "Isn't this fooling people? Remember, if you want to save them, don't think those civilians are too smart, and don't tell them the truth," Wu Wang reminded. The next day, Riddle, who stuffed the white silk into the fish's belly as instructed, soon witnessed his good brother's performance again. There was books hidden in the belly of a fish before, and wild fox howling at night after, which confused all the civilians. Riddle also keenly noticed that the eyes these people looked at him were different from before. The opportunity has quietly come. Taking advantage of the drunken officer of the escort team, Wu Wang started his career as a movie star again. He first deliberately threatened to escape in front of the other party, angered the officer, and provoked the other party to insult and whip him in public, arousing the anger of everyone. Then he joined Riddle to seize the sword and killed the two accompanying officers, and gathered everyone together to give an exciting speech. Watkin law is strict, and those who miss the deadline should be beheaded. If you die now, you will die, and if you carry out a big plan, you will die, waiting for death. Is it okay for the country to die? Attacking the unrighteous and punishing the tyrannical kin, Riddle stood on the high platform in the days. Although he was the protagonist among the protagonists, the King Chen Sheng in Wu Wang's mouth was like a puppet at the mercy of others. In a trance, his soul seemed to be leaving his body. Red saw himself standing on the stage, holding his hands high, and uttering an inspiring roar. "Our kings, princes, generals, and ministers of different species?" In an instant, the response was like a tsunami, resounding through the world. The civilians below raised their torches and cheered in unison. "The great Chu will rise, and Chen Sheng will be the king." Amid the deafening shouts, Red woke up from his sleep and broke out in a cold sweat. In front of him was still the familiar cold mine cave, and all the memories he had lost before came back to his mind. Was it a dream? Red thought so, but everything he had experienced was so real, almost the same as reality, and he could even remember every detail of the dream clearly. For a moment, Red couldn't tell whether he was Chen Sheng, the head of the empire, or Red. He didn't know what Zhuangzhu's dream of a butterfly was, but he had the same feeling at this moment. Suddenly, Riddle felt something strange on his hand. He looked down and found that he had an exquisite ring on his right index finger. He had never seen such a beautifully crafted thing. The ring was engraved with extremely mysterious patterns and was still glowing faintly. The devil's creation? Riddle thought of this immediately. The church has been promoting that there is a group of believers of evil gods and devils in the kingdom of Hadrata. They master extremely strange witchcraft and can do many incredible things. If someone sees an object engraved with strange rune patterns, it must be a trap set by the devil's believers. As long as you touch it, you will become unfortunate, and even pollute your soul and drag you into hell. Thinking of this, Riddle quickly took off the ring and was about to throw it away. But thinking of everything he had just experienced in the dream, he became hesitant again. Chapter 253, The Dragon Slayer eventually becomes a dragon. This is true for all times and all places. What's wrong, Riddle? Did you have a nightmare? In the cold mine, a faint voice sounded in his ears. Startled, Riddle subconsciously put the ring into his pocket, and turned around to see the person who spoke. Ham, Uncle Ham. How do you feel? Riddle lowered his voice and asked with concern. Better, it seems I won't die yet, Ham said weakly. Uncle Ham, tell me, Why do we have to stay in this mine for a lifetime, working hard to eat black bread and wheat soup, while those noble children don't have to do anything, but can live in a big manor and eat delicious food?" Redel asked in confusion. Ham was also stunned by Redel's question for a while. He had never thought of such a question before. After hesitating for a long time, he sighed and said, "This is fate. The poor are born poor, the nobles are born nobles, everything is the will of the goddess, and this is also a test for you and me." Ham held the wooden holy light mark on his chest and whispered, "Is everything destined?" Redel's heart was empty, but soon the roar in the dream echoed in his mind. "Are there any kings, princes, generals, or ministers?" The voices of the poor against the royal power from another world made Redel shudder and also left a mark of resistance in his heart. But it is obviously impossible to succeed with just passion. Redel's idea of resistance was extinguished when he saw the fully armed guards. After all, he was just a teenager in his early 20s with a little knowledge of herbs. He could not beat the dozens of guards in the mine. More importantly, reality is different from dreams. Without a resourceful Wu Guang by his side to give him advice, he could do nothing. Redel could only continue his work in a daze, watching Ham, whose old wounds had not yet healed, holding on to his body and carrying heavy pieces of ore. He was furious but could do nothing, until the night fell again. Redel hesitated to put on the ring, hid his hand behind his back, and entered the dream. Just as he had thought before, he entered the magical dream world again, but this time he did not lose his memory. As Chen Sheng, he led 900 civilians to prepare to resist the rule of the tyrannical Qin. But this time it was not as smooth as before, and the experience could no longer be described as difficult and dangerous. Because of his poor performance, his best brother Wu Guang took power and died. He wanted to attack Shi County, but his secret was exposed and died. When he finally organized his men and waited for the regular army of the empire to kill him, he still died. Redel was about to be depressed. He remembered that it didn't seem so difficult before. Redel didn't know that Wu Guang, who was loyal and gave him advice before, was actually a kind of protection for the novice. In reality, there are not so many people who are thoughtful, resourceful, and will not betray. After half a month, he has lost count of how many times he has died, and the content of each dream is not exactly the same. Sometimes he is Fang La, who needs to lead the poor who are oppressed by the Sun Court to resist. Sometimes he is called Zhongju, who pretends to be a god and fools a large number of believers, and even masters magical magic, but needs to deal with a large group of human war gods with special skills who cut soldiers like cutting grass. His only advantage is that after death, everything will be reset, and he has a chance to come again. Redel is growing bit by bit despite the difficulties, but what impressed him most is not the pain of death again and again, but the tragedy of cannibalism and no roosters crowing in the vast land. This is a world of cannibalism. The endless exploitation of the poor by bureaucrats and nobles makes Redel feel extremely angry. Finally, he led a group of ragged poor people, defeated wave after wave of encirclement and suppression, and finally gained his own territory. However, Redel found that his men had changed. They began to learn to burn, kill, rob, enslave the poor, and indulge in wealth and power like those regular troops he regarded as brutal. After gaining power and status, the oppressed immediately changed their faces and became the people they hated and despised the most. Why? Why is it like this? Redel fell into deep confusion, lost his previous spirit, and even gave up resistance, allowing the city to be breached and died in the sword. This time, he did not escape from the dream, but came to a very strange place. The surroundings were the deepest darkness, with only a few tiny lights flashing in the distance. In front of him, stood a figure, an exceptionally young man, perhaps even younger than himself. "Are you a devil?" Redel summoned up the courage to ask. "What do you think?" Lin En asked back. Redel hesitated and didn't answer, so Lin En smiled and said, "Of course I am a human, just like you. If you insist on saying the difference, maybe I know more and know a little magic." "Magic? Wizards, believers of evil gods and demons?" Redel paused and said subconsciously, "In fact, wizards don't believe in evil gods or demons. At least most normal wizards are like this." Lin En explained, "If wizards really care about something, It is to explore the truth of the world. The truth of the world? Riddle murmured in a low voice. Why do people have to stand on the ground and can't fly in the sky? Why does the sun rise and why does it set? We discover the laws of the world and gain power from them, and call it magic. Lin En's voice kept echoing in this dark space, like a huge bell knocking on Riddle's heart, but it made him more confused. Isn't it because people can't fly without wings? Is there any other reason why the sun rises and sets? Riddle was puzzled, but he was obviously not concerned about these things now. After hesitating for a while, he could not help but ask, why do I have these strange dreams? Why do those poor people, who have clearly suffered the pain of being oppressed, inflict the same pain on others after gaining wealth and power? This is human nature. It is both a shortcoming and an advantage. It depends on how you use it and what kind of world you want to create. Lin En said lightly, desire is both the driving force that drives people forward and the cause of change. It is also the root cause of corruption and greed. The dragon slayer eventually becomes a dragon. This is the biggest problem encountered by reformers in ancient and modern times, both at home and abroad. Chapter 254. We are in hell right now. Part 1. Riddle fell into a long thought. With his age and experience, he could not understand Lin's words, but everything he saw in the dream gradually made him understand what the other party wanted to express. Is there any way to avoid this? Riddle asked at a loss. No, unless people's desires are completely eradicated. But in this case, what is the difference between them and those walking corpses? Lin shook his head, paused for a while, and spoke again. Of course, if you insist, establishing faith to suppress desires may be a way. Faith? Do you mean faith in the moon goddess, Ella? Riddle frowned, but the Baron was also a believer of the goddess, but he still treated them harshly. No, it would be more appropriate to describe it as belief. Lin explained. First, establish strict military discipline. Let the people who follow you know what the purpose of your rebellion is, what things to do, and put forward corresponding programs and goals. It is best to be directly related to the interests of everyone, such as equality for all, equal distribution of land, etc. Then gather those people with firm beliefs and form a personal guard. Let them spread your ideas, and at the same time purge those who violate the rules to ensure the purity of the team. Lin En said eloquently, it is not an empty saying that thieves pass by like combs, and soldiers pass by like combs. Not to mention ancient times, even in modern times, it is common for regular armies to massacre and plunder after breaking into cities. However, there are exceptions. For example, the famous Yu family army in history had the concept of freezing to death without demolishing houses, starving to death without looting. These are only temporary solutions, not fundamental solutions. You can manage an army, but you can't manage a huge kingdom. You can also find your own answers and dreams. Lin En said slowly. Riddle nodded as if he understood, and kept these words firmly in his heart. What are these dreams? Are they all my imaginations? Riddle looked confused, because the scenes in the dream were so real, and even had cultures and customs that were very different from this world. Sometimes he couldn't tell which was reality and which was a dream. Who knows? This world is so big, and your experience in the dream may be happening in a corner of this world. Lin En said with a smile. Then what do I need to pay? Riddle took a deep breath and prepared himself. His experience in the dream world had already made him understand that there is no free lunch in the world, and all gifts have already been marked with a price. Is the soul taken to hell after death? Riddle asked nervously. Hell? Lin En couldn't help laughing, and then shook his head and sighed. Think about it. Isn't the place you are in hell now? Could it be that this is the legendary hell? Riddle paused, but before he could ask, the entire dark space shook violently, and then he left the magic field. It was not until then that Riddle realized that the vibrations around him had not stopped, but had become more violent. There were screams ringing in his ears. The mine cave collapsed. Run! The mine cave collapsed. Mine disaster? Exclamation mark. Riddle's pupils shrank slightly. Having been in this mine for 5 years, he knew the horror of mine disasters very well, so he didn't even have time to pack up his things, and hurriedly followed the chaotic crowd out of the mine cave. The mine outside was in great chaos. It was raining heavily in the sky. The cold rain poured on everyone, and mixed with the cold wind at night, dispelling everyone's hazy sleepiness. From the fearful stories of the surrounding miners, Redel learned that it was a small underground mining area that suddenly collapsed due to the continuous infiltration of rainwater in recent days. Fortunately, this collapse did not continue to spread, otherwise all of them might die in their sleep. Rupert, the supervisor, had a dark face. After counting the number of people, he found that more than 30 people were missing. That is to say, all of them were left in the mine, or were trapped under the collapsed road, or were simply crushed to death by the falling ore. Why at this time? Rupert was extremely annoyed. In 2 days, the ore transporting convoy would arrive. If the ore mined by then did not meet the requirements of the Baron, he would most likely be punished. However, he did not intend to organize rescue immediately. The situation in the mine was not clear yet, and rushing in might cause a second collapse. The most important thing was that Rupert knew very well that once a mine disaster occurred, the probability of those trapped inside surviving was very small. Instead of spending several days digging out the bodies, it would be better to seize the time and go to other mines to mine more or to deal with this month's task first. To put it bluntly, these miners were just consumables. Every month, dozens or hundreds of miners were brought to this mine, and they would die if they died. Lord Rupert, Carlo, my brother Carlo is still inside. Please, save him. A ragged man begged Rupert to gather people to carry out excavation and rescue work. Rupert, who was already annoyed, immediately cursed and kicked the other party, venting his anger, and even blamed the cause of the mine collapse on Carlo and others trapped in it. The pleading and crying kept ringing in his ears, and the big raindrops soaked the top of his head and slid down his cheeks. Redel looked at the collapsed mine, Rupert who was waving a long whip, and a group of numb miners who watched, and they were completely awakened. They are in hell now. An inexplicable courage rose from his heart. Redel clenched the mine draft in his hand, and walked into the mine firmly. What are you doing, Redel? Rupert quickly noticed the other party's movement and scolded him harshly. I'm going to dig up that mining area and rescue Carlo and the others, Redel said loudly, and then looked at the miners around him and shouted. I've asked just now, and the mine collapse this time shouldn't be serious. I hope everyone can work together to clean up the collapsed soil and ore, otherwise, don't expect others to rescue you next time there's a mine accident. Chapter 255 We are in hell right now, Part 2. Redel's words made the miners hesitate. The man who had begged Rupert before immediately spoke excitedly as if he had grabbed the last straw. Thank you, Redel, I'll go with you. With a leader, more and more miners picked up the draft and made a decision. Rebellion, all of them. Rupert was furious and shouted loudly, I want to see who dares to move. The power accumulated by Rupert over the years was undoubtedly terrifying. With the help of the 30 knife-wielding guards around him, hundreds of miners were instantly suppressed. Then, Rupert looked at Redel. The other party had repeatedly provoked His Majesty, and now he even dared to incite the miners to disobey his orders. This has touched his bottom line. Without any warning, Rupert whipped Redel with a long whip, and a bloody mark suddenly exploded on his chest, and a severe pain surged into his heart. This time Redel did not dodge or be knocked down. He stood there and stared at Rupert. Rupert was frightened by Redel's glare, and then his eyes became more fierce. A miner dared to look at him like that. He was simply courting death. Thinking of this, Rupert whipped him again, this time aiming directly at his head. The onlookers' eyes were filled with anger. In order to rescue the miners in distress, Redel dared to stand up against Rupert, and had won the approval of most people. A strong anger burned in everyone's heart. Redel noticed this change, and this time he did not take it hard. He grabbed the whip with his right hand with great precision, and then suddenly stepped forward, rushed forward, and stabbed the tip of the oar in his other hand into Rupert's eyes. Fresh red blood spurted out immediately, and miserable screams resounded throughout the venue. Rupert had never expected that the thin Redel would suddenly attack, and he was so cruel. In fact, if it were Redel half a month ago, he would never have such courage and bravery, let alone such superb fighting skills. But the tempering in the dream world has made Redel complete his transformation. He did not give Rupert a chance to fight back. He stirred the draft in his hand and sent it into Rupert's brain. Rupert's body soon fell to the ground, with a huge blood hole in his right eye socket, and his face was full of disbelief and horror. All this happened in just a few seconds, and it was beyond everyone's expectations. Ham and others were all stunned in place, and even the guards were no exception. It was not until Rupert's right eye was pierced that they reacted and rushed towards Redo with knives. "We've had enough. Kill them all." Redo's roar resounded through the world, and the miners whose anger had been ignited in their hearts subconsciously moved. The man who had begged Rupert before jumped up from the ground, waving the draft and smashing it on the head of a guard. The stingy baron would not deliberately equip these guards who managed the mines with high-end goods such as helmets, and his head immediately opened. Then more and more miners rushed over. The few dozen guards had no ability to resist at all. In just a few minutes, they were hammered to pieces by the miners attacking from all directions. Even so, the miners who usually accumulated anger still did not let go of the bodies of these people. After venting for more than half an hour, everyone realized what they had done. We actually killed Rupert. The Baron will definitely execute all of us." Ham was stunned and screamed as if he had just reacted. Looking at the bodies of Rupert and others in the mine, which had been bloody and turned into a pool of mud, many miners knelt on the ground and trembled, obviously at a loss. "Ham, do you think we can survive by staying in this mine?" Riddle shouted harshly. "Rupert doesn't care about our lives at all." This time, it was Carlo who was trapped in the mine. "The next time, it will be you and me. Rupert wants to kill all of us." Riddle looked at the people present and shouted loudly, "I've had enough. I'm tired of staying in the dark mine every day without seeing the sun, wagging my tail like a poor hyena, begging Rupert to give me a few more pieces of hard-to-chew black bread, and worrying that the ore above my head will fall down one day and bury us forever underground. I believe you should not have forgotten to me, fairness, and tyranny." Riddle pointed out the miners who died in the mine one after another. Some were buried in the mine accident, and some were beaten to death by Rupert with a long whip. He talked for several minutes and read out 60 or 70 names, and these were only some of the people who died in the past 3 months. In order to please the Baron and mine more ore, Rupert didn't care about their lives at all, which also led to the frequent occurrence of mine accidents recently. "We can't fight against the Baron. All this is arranged by the Lord, otherwise, all our souls will fall into hell," Ham said with a trembling voice. "That's all lies." Riddle roared angrily. "Wake up, Ham. Nothing can be worse than now. Aren't we in hell right now?" Riddle's sharp words made Ham speechless, and then he led a group of miners to open the storage room in the mine, let everyone have a good meal, and then divided nearly 1,000 miners into 2 groups. Some people stayed in the mine to dig and rescue Carlo and others who were trapped. The other part of the people attacked the guard camp stationed at the foot of the mine with him overnight, changed into the clothes of these guards, and sneaked into the Baron's territory. Riddle acted quickly and planned very carefully. It took almost no effort to occupy the entire manor and captured Baron Elvis, who was still asleep. The noble's extravagant manner frightened and angered every miner who entered it. Riddle even held a criticism meeting on the spot, enumerating the other party's crimes, and stabbed the terrified Baron Elvis into a sieve. Finally, it was the church. Relying on dozens of crossbows looted from the manor, he executed the priest in the church at the cost of more than 10 casualties. Although everything went very smoothly, Riddle knew very well that he had only completed the simplest step. He had to rescue more miners as soon as possible and expand his team. Chapter 256. The only thing that can compete with firm belief is tangible interests, good performance. In the dean's office at Yaita Harbor, Lin En used the ring of mysticism to spy on Riddle's every move from thousands of kilometers away. He was thinking about whether to help him a little, but he didn't expect Riddle to be more powerful than he imagined. With the help of the mine collapse, he successfully aroused the anger of the miners, knocked down the guards, and roared that the miners would never be slaves. "Then I will give him witchcraft after a while." Lin En thought about it and made a decision. It is better to wait for the other party to come to him when he encounters trouble than for him to take the initiative to come to him, and he might be misunderstood. At the same time, he also collected a list on the table. These are some personnel information that Loud and others found in various mines that are suitable to be leaders. Since Riddle's performance is better than he expected, there is no need to find others for the time being. Handing over the ring of mystic magic, is a big risk. If you run into a tough guy who firmly believes that this is the devil's deception and directly reports it, it will be bad if it attracts the attention of the church. In Lin En's opinion, the biggest problem for wizards to gain a foothold on this continent, in addition to facing the so-called God's descent, is how to solve the problem of faith. You must know that the church's influence is spread throughout every town in the entire Sekha's empire, and even a small barony will have 1 or 2 priests stationed. Although these people are limited in strength and can only release a weak ring of magic through prayer, which is barely stronger than a wizard apprentice, they are the foundation of the church and spread the faith to every corner of the empire. Even a subsidiary kingdom like Hajarata is no exception. If this point is not resolved, even if they gain control of the kingdom, the people below will spontaneously resist them and become the eyes of the church. This is also the reason why he took the trouble to fool Lin into rebellion. The only thing that can compete with firm faith is real interests. These miners and poor people either believe in digging ore in the mines for their whole lives, and being exploited by the nobles and the church, or work in workshops. Although it is a bit tiring, they can get rich rewards. Except for a few fanatics, the other poor people and miners will naturally know which side they should stand on. Dong dong dong, Lin En was thinking, and there was a knock on the door. Then, the door was gently opened, and Philip came in with an orange envelope in his hand. Dean Lin En, it's an invitation letter from the parliament. Lin En reached out to take it, opened the envelope and took a few glances, and then found that the parliament was going to hold a grand meeting at 10 p.m. to discuss the future of the wizarding land. Lin En immediately realized that something must have changed. I just don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but anyway, such an important meeting still needs to be attended. Now the technology of internal combustion airships has been very perfect. It only takes less than 3 hours to travel from Yayata to Green Rail City, which is very convenient. In the evening, a huge airship slowly landed outside the Corona Tower. The servants at the door were already used to it, but no one dared to neglect Lin En, the new magic star. The garrison great wizard Sanchez personally came out to greet him and thanked Lin En. When fighting against Auguste, if it weren't for Lin En and Raphael's timely rescue, he would have died long ago. Don't say that, Master Sanchez. Auguste is not someone who can be defeated by 1 or 2 people. If you hadn't been brave enough to rush to the front and attract the other party's attention, the result would be unpredictable. Lin En responded modestly. The two chatted all the way and soon boarded the Sky Realm. The spacious conference hall was already full of people, and several legendary speakers had already arrived, which meant that he was the last one to arrive, so he hurriedly sat down. Cosimo is dead. After the meeting started, Herv said directly without any greetings. Who is Cosimo? Lin En was stunned at first, and after thinking about it, he immediately realized that Cosimo was the one who brought the evil god statue into the wizard's land. His true identity was probably a saint, or at least a cardinal. However, Lin En had thought that Herv and others had killed him long ago, but he didn't expect that this guy died after so long. It was not until he finished listening to Herv's story that Lin En realized that the souls of such high-ranking officials of the church had long been deeply bound to the kingdom of God. Once the other party died, the soul would be attracted and collected by the kingdom of God. So the parliament directly imprisoned Cosimo and tried to use magic to explore his memory and figure out the plan of the church. As a result, Cosimo's will was extremely firm. They did not get too many useful clues, and they could not stop the other party from choosing to die. It can be seen that before arriving at the wizard's land, Cosimo had already prepared for being captured and set up the corresponding spell. So Cosimo's soul has returned to the kingdom of God of Ella. Again, Lin En frowned immediately. No, we destroyed his soul along with his body. Herv shook his head and continued. But I think she should be able to sense this. Lin En was thoughtful. Just like the mental connection of the intelligent brain, he could also understand the mental state of these people at any time. The goddess might not pay attention to the life and death of ordinary believers, but it was possible for a powerful soul like Cosimo. Many counselors present were worried. Although the previous spell of the Sea of Mist was destroyed, they still had a little fluke. If the church did not discover this secret during this period, they could continue to practice magic in peace. Now it is obvious that their idea has failed. However, the war faction like Sanchez was very happy. Although the power of the church was huge, the land of wizards was no longer the same as before. They were tired of staying on this palm-sized island like a captive camel. In short, this war is probably unavoidable, and the Yayata harbor will bear the brunt and is likely to become a battlefield. Prv looked at Lin En and reminded him, Yayata has a good geographical location. It is a natural harbor and is facing the Sekka's empire, so there is a high probability that it will be attacked. I have a suggestion. Lin En, who had been silent all the time, suddenly spoke and looked at the counselors present. Why don't we lead the battlefield to other places? Fighting in the wizard land is not a good choice. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 257, Creating a Wizard's Paradise. Lin En's words kept echoing in the Sky Realm. Of course, all the congressmen would understand this truth. Once the battlefield is placed in the land of wizards, even if they win in the end, they will inevitably suffer heavy losses. Not to mention failure, the end of the wizards will come. But the problem is that even the most confident war faction is not sure of victory. If they take the initiative to attack, they need to disperse their forces, with some people defending in the land of wizards and the other part going to the Sekka's empire. If, on the other hand, they shrink their forces and stay here, the church will need to cross the entire Sea of Mist and come from afar. Even if the elite are all out, at most there are only tens of thousands of people, and they can also use various protective arrays laid in advance to fight the enemy, which will greatly make up for the gap in combat power between the two sides. You can say whatever you think, Congressman Lin En, Aurora suddenly said. She knew very well that since the other party dared to make this suggestion, it would naturally not be aimless. Under the gaze of the crowd, Lin En reached out his hand and tapped the conference table a few times. The tabletop was like the surface of water, and then a huge map covering the entire conference table appeared in front of everyone. That is the territory of the Sekka's empire, about 4 to 5 million square kilometers from north to south, with tens of millions of people, and this is just the number recorded in the book. This is undoubtedly a behemoth, and the land of wizards is also marked out, only the size of a finger, and the gap between the two sides is self-evident. This is the kingdom of Hadrada, and it is also the largest kingdom under the rule of Sekka's. Lin En's hand quickly pointed to the large coastal territory on the right side of the Sekka's empire, and explained Anthony's Magic Kingdom plan to the confused crowd. To put it bluntly, it is to be supported by wizards, to create divisions within the empire, to let them fight each other, and if the situation permits, to seize control of the entire kingdom and turn it into a paradise for wizards. As Lin En kept talking, Sanchez and others suddenly felt their eyes brighten. Just look at the map and you will know that the kingdom of Hadrada occupies nearly 1/5 of the territory of the empire. If this plan succeeds, it will definitely be a major blow to the church. This is much better than staying in the land of wizards and waiting for the other side to attack. It is equivalent to transferring the battlefield to the territory of the Sekka's empire. Even if the final battle is unfavorable, they still have a way out. At least they can buy more time until the legendary spell, Lost Mist, is completed again. Moreover, the concept of the Magic Kingdom itself makes people feel excited. Is that Master Anthony another member of the secret society? After listening to Lin En's story, Prv asked in a low voice. Yes, Lin En nodded. Not only Prv, but other counselors are also interested. Since Lin En has become famous in the land of wizards, the secret society has become a topic of conversation for everyone. Because this unique magic organization is too mysterious, most people can see that the only member of the secret society from the outside world is Lin En. Although Dick, Alva and others boasted to everyone about how profound the wisdom of Master Leibniz was, and the Magic Daily also published a lot of cutting-edge calculus knowledge, which made those wizards who were eager to learn mathematical Olympiad very excited, There were still many who doubted this overly mysterious organization. Master Anthony is a member of the secret society. He has been planning the Magic Kingdom in the Empire. Now it is time to finish it, and he is also happy to cooperate with us, Lin En said with a smile. This is the best news I have heard. The solemn look on Rav's face dissipated a little. If some members of the secret society can also participate, it will undoubtedly share a lot of pressure. The other counselors were very curious about this new member of the secret society from the Secus Empire, and asked about it. Lin En did not hide it, and immediately told Anthony about a unique method that allowed formal wizards to successfully use electromagnetic power. Perhaps Anthony had not been asked to conceal the research results on electromagnetic magic given to him before, or perhaps Anthony thought that the secret society did not look down on the method he was researching, and hiding it would only make people laugh. When they learned that this method was to introduce the power of thunder into the body and let the magic power in the body be passively analyzed, everyone present could not help but break out in a cold sweat. Although it was not uncommon for wizards to use their own bodies as experimental subjects, the power of thunder was extremely terrifying. Even if they were great wizards, they would also risk death if they rashly introduced thunder into their bodies. It can only be said that he was worthy of being a member of the secret society. This spirit of dedication to academics was admirable. Of course, after decades of research, the secret society has now mastered the safe learning of electromagnetic magic, and even the method of creating lightning without the help of magic, without having to risk their lives as before. As for the specific method, it is currently only open to members of the secret society. Lin En talked freely. With Anthony as a cover, it would be much easier for him to propose various electromagnetic theories. Lin En's words undoubtedly whetted everyone's appetite. There is no need to describe too much about the power of electromagnetic magic. The lightning that passes through the clouds and the occasional thunderstorms in the wizard's land can show it. Artificial lightning is undoubtedly the key to learning thunder magic. Otherwise they can only wait for thunderstorms to fly thousands of meters above the sky to receive lightning strikes. You must know that the electric current mimicked by magic is essentially magic. After being analyzed by material deconstruction, nothing can be obtained except magic. Therefore, if you want to truly learn magic, you must find the most primitive element. Tick, Alva, and Delison, who had joined the Secret Law Society because of studying mathematical Olympiad, were very surprised. They did not expect such a benefit. Okay, please discuss the matter of the electromagnetic magic after the meeting. Rav interrupted the discussion of the crowd and said solemnly, now, let's vote on the Magic Kingdom. The discussions in the Sky Realm came to an abrupt end. After pondering and hesitating for a moment, more than 140 congressmen spoke up for the vote. In the end, the meeting ended with nearly 80% of the congressmen supporting the Magic Kingdom plan. Chapter 258. The great Earl Joyce was so frightened that he fled overnight. After the meeting, the members left the Sky Realm with heavy hearts. After Lin En became familiar with several great wizards, he also took the time to ask about Greenreal's war preparedness. In the past few months, the Parliament has assembled and trained a 20,000-man army. Compared with the Empire and the Church, this is obviously not enough, but the population of the wizard land is limited, with only 600,000 or 700,000 people in total. It is impossible to use human wave tactics like their enemies, and they can only win by quality. Although the so-called quality is just a luxury, after all, these legions have little combat experience. In addition, the magic beasts tamed by the potion wizards may also be useful. Then there are the wizards' killer magic crystal cannons and glums. First of all, the magic crystal cannon, the principle of which is to compress the magic power stored in the magic crystal together and launch it in the most basic way. Simple but effective. The power of ordinary magic crystal cannons is roughly equivalent to that of third-ring magic, while high-level magic crystal cannons can be compared to fourth-ring magic. Although it is only one ring of magic difference, the power has increased by more than 10 times. In contrast, the cost of high-level magic crystal cannons is also extremely expensive. Each bombardment requires a fist-sized magic crystal, which means that hundreds of magic gold coins are only enough to fire one shell. Lin En had the opportunity to experience and control this special alchemical weapon before, and he had a rough estimate of its power. In terms of destructive power alone, it is much stronger than the cannons produced in the workshop. The disadvantage is that it is expensive and has a limited range of attack. The closer the distance, the stronger the power. It is not very useful beyond 500 meters. Since there was no need for a war in the wizard land before, and the manufacturing process itself is very complicated, even if the two types of magic crystal cannons are added together, there are only 100 of them, most of which are deployed in Green Real City and around the Magic Stone Mine. However, this is all an illusion. It was not until the Parliament was preparing for war that it was discovered that due to lack of maintenance and even being stolen and sold, only a pitiful 50 cannons were left. As the president of the Alchemy Association, magic creator, Vittorio was furious, and the Alchemy Association was severely reorganized. The second is the golem, which is even more precious than the magic crystal cannon. It is made of solid mithril, and forms a unique magic inscription circuit inside. The psychic wizard projects part of his consciousness into the golem to control it. After the various schools pieced together, they barely put together 70 golems. At that time, the Psychic Academy will send corresponding personnel to assist in the battle. Listening to this news, Lin En was also laughing and crying. It seems that there has been peace for a long time before, and these wizards have never thought about going to war. If the church suddenly attacks, the entire wizard land is estimated to be unable to use even 50% of its strength. Sir Lin En, I heard from Master Raphael that the Aida school has developed a new weapon called a musket, which is much more powerful than a crossbow and can easily penetrate armor and even magic shield. Is that true? Sanchez asked curiously. They had all read the report submitted by Raphael, which clearly mentioned that this was a weapon that could allow trained ordinary people to threaten wizards. Not bad. Lin En nodded. What is the price of this thing? Sanchez continued. He had always been in charge of the training of the newly recruited 20,000 new soldiers, and naturally he was most concerned about this new weapon. 2 magic gold coins for a musket. Lin En pondered for a long time before speaking, giving a price that was neither high nor low. The cost of making a musket alone was about 15 magic silver coins, and considering the labor and transportation costs, it would need to be doubled. However, Lin En did not mean to ask for too much. Facing the church that did not know the details, everyone had to go all out. And compared to the musket itself, the constantly consumed ammunition was the most profitable. In view of the sale price given by Lin En, Sanchez purchased 10,000 muskets without hesitation. Now it was Lin En's turn to be in trouble. The output of the musket workshop is still very limited. How about this? I can give you 2,000 flintlock rifles first. It's no problem to rotate them for daily training. They don't need to be very accurate, as long as they can use them. I will slowly make up for it later. Yayata's musket workshop has been expanding in recent times. Now it can produce about 3,000 muskets per month. When the workers are proficient in their skills, the output should continue to increase. However, it is not easy to gather 10,000 muskets in a short period of time. As for the leakage of technology, this is inevitable. Lin En doesn't care much. Darren and others are already studying the production of percussion rifles. When someone can reproduce the flintlock rifle, this thing is probably obsolete. After discussing the sale of the muskets, Lin En and Sanchez turned to discuss the training of the army. Sanchez, who was born in the land of wizards, was completely blind to the training of the Legion. Fortunately, he worked together to figure out some ways, such as how to make them cooperate with the wizard's magic, and simulate the confrontation between the two armies. Lin En's methods are much more direct. For the musketeers, discipline is the first priority, and the second is the adaptability of the battlefield. How to face the enemy's group charge, or even a rain of arrows, and still stand in place to calmly complete the actions of cleaning the rifling, placing ammunition, aiming and firing. So he directly asked the wizards who were idle in Yayata to catch some monsters and let the musketeers fight in small teams. The deterrent power of these monsters is not weaker than that of the battlefield. Facing a fire lion with fire all over its body, those who can complete the replacement of bullets, firing, and shooting our qualified musketeers. This method is not bad, Sanchez said with appreciation. There will be no big problems with wizards watching on the side, so he immediately decided to promote it. The new recruits who were training far outside Greenrail City did not know that their nightmare was about to begin. While the wizard land was urgently preparing for war affairs, the mighty movement to liberate the miners in the kingdom of Hadrata became more and more intense. Starting from the small barony of Elvis, Red Hill swept across nearly 1/7 of the territory of the kingdom of Hadrata in less than a month and organized a team of more than 10,000 people. Earl Joyce was so scared that he fled overnight and passed this shocking news to the capital of Hadrata. Chapter 259. Those miners. They have no moral principles. A grand court banquet was being held in the luxurious and exquisite palace of the Hadrata kingdom. The nobles in gorgeous clothes held transparent glass wine glasses in their hands, walked between young maids and beautiful ladies, tasted delicious food, and their faces were filled with flattery or complacent smiles. The two protagonists of the banquet were naturally the two crown princes of Hadrata, Harold and Hatra, who were surrounded by the crowd. This also made the originally lively banquet more tense. On the main seat of the palace, Basil, the monarch of the kingdom of Hadrata, was left aside, but he did not seem to care about the offense of the nobles. He looked at the dispute between the two princes indifferently, as if he was watching a boring drama. Just as the banquet was gradually reaching its climax, the door of the hall was suddenly opened by someone. Just like a disgusting maggot inexplicably appeared on a delicious food, the nobles present all turned their heads to the door upon hearing the extremely presumptuous sound of the door being pushed open, wanting to see who was so bold. The one who broke in was a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and a dirty face. His exquisite clothes were covered with dust and mud, forming a sharp contrast with the people in the banquet hall. The guards guarding the door were trying hard to drag him out. Earl Joyce, what's wrong with you? The eldest Prince Harold walked forward quickly and said with an unwavering expression. Joyce was one of his followers. Not only did he miss the banquet today, but he also broke in at the critical moment of the banquet in dishevel, without the slightest aristocratic demeanor, which was a loss of face for him. Your Highness, the miners. Those miners are crazy. Joyce's dusty hands tightly grasped Harold's sleeves, and he tearfully complained about how the damned miners suddenly broke into his territory, burned, killed and looted, so that his castle and manor were occupied by those miners. Listening to Joyce's story, the nobles almost laughed out loud. Before, when they saw Joyce's embarrassed appearance, they thought that those vicious evil God-believers had jumped out to make trouble again, but it turned out to be just a group of miners' riots. Of course, this is not to say that similar things are rare. In fact, it is just the opposite. Miners' riots are common in the kingdom of Hadrata. Once these humble poor people are full and have strength, they will begin to be dissatisfied with the status quo. You must know that every miner is paid by them, and mining ores their job. However, no matter how many people there are, these miners are just a mob. Usually, they only need a few rounds of volleys from 100 guards armed with crossbows to scatter. It is as ridiculous as a group of rats trying to provoke a fire lion. This time is different, Joyce said in a hurried tone. How is it different? Earl Joyce, can those miners fly to the sky and shoot arrows at you? Hatch asked with a sneer. They not only occupied my castle, but also destroyed the church and smashed the statue of the goddess, Joyce said in a trembling voice. The banquet hall, which was originally filled with laughter and joy, immediately became extremely quiet. You could hear a pin drop. There were cases in the past where the cowardly nobles gave blind orders and were killed by the rioting miners, but this was the first time that the church and the statue of the goddess were attacked. How dare they? Madmen! They are just crazy men. This group of damned blasphemers. An archbishop almost fainted on the spot after hearing the news. How dare these lowly miners blaspheme God? Are you sure they are just a group of miners? A cold voice suddenly sounded, and it was Cardinal Ansialuc who spoke. The nobles gathered around Joyce immediately dispersed. Ansialuc, who was dressed in a red and gold robe and had a burly figure, walked in from the gap made by the crowd. He stood there like a towering mountain, making everyone present feel a huge sense of oppression. Each earldom has at least one bishop and several priests stationed there, plus thousands of soldiers guarding the castle. A group of rioting miners alone is not enough to capture it, and destroying the statue of the goddess is not something that miners would do. I'm not sure, Lord Ansiluke, but I only saw those miners. Joyce responded hesitantly. Before, he received news that a group of rioting miners had captured one of his baronies and killed Baron Elvis. Joyce naturally could not tolerate it, so he summoned a guard of 1,000 people and went out in person to suppress the riot. As a result, the damn miners had no martial ethics at all. They came and went like the wind, and they were elusive. They used poison, dig traps, and internal accomplices, and did not give themselves a chance to fight head-on. His guards were led into the trap by these miners and died under the falling rocks and the spikes of the earth pit. In the end, Joyce fought hard and fought his way out under the protection of the guards. As a result, when he was about to return to the castle and summon the army to fight again, he found that those shameless miners played a trick of feinting to the east and attacking in the west. He had occupied his castle at some point, so that he was almost ambushed on the way back. Joyce, who was still frightened, could only run to the capital to ask for help, and he also found out a piece of news. After conquering the Elvis Baron's territory, the leader, Redel, distributed all the Baron's money and lent to the poor in the territory, and also captured the local church and killed the local priest. As for the current situation of the earldom, Joyce is still unaware, but it is estimated that the end will not be too good. After Joyce exaggerated the story, a burst of anger and a little fear surged in the hearts of the nobles. Grand Duke Crickman roared that he would immediately send out a large army to kill those lowly miners. There were also several large mines in his territory, so he would naturally not allow such a thing to happen. These blasphemers will be punished and fall into eternal purgatory, Inlock said in a deep voice, and then turned to look at King Basil, who was sitting in the main seat and had not said a word so far. Your Majesty, Basil, I heard that you have been hesitating about appointing a crown prince recently. Now, the mining slave riot that has affected the southeastern part of the kingdom is the best opportunity for the two princes to show their abilities and decide who will be the next crown prince. What do you think? Inlock's words were immediately agreed by all the nobles, who echoed him. King Basil just watched the nobles and priests calls one after another, and it took a long time before he replied. Yes. Chapter 260. This is all that adults plan. The celebratory and lively banquet in the capital ended hastily with Joyce's disruption and the turmoil of establishing the crown prince, but for most nobles, the dispute had just begun. As the #1 supporter of the eldest Prince Harold, Grand Duke Crickman announced in a high-profile manner after the banquet that he would obey the command of God and personally lead the army to the earldom of Joyce to fight against the rioting miners. The other nobles who supported Harold also responded one after another. In order to save time and avoid being preempted by the men of the second Prince Hatcher, more than a dozen nobles decided to gather their private soldiers together after discussion, and recruit some serf soldiers from the southern part of the kingdom. Within a week, they could gather an army of 15,000 people. It was enough to crush the rioting miners into powder. What surprised everyone was that Hatcher, as a strong contender for the crown prince, did not make much move. In fact, after returning from the palace, Hatcher also summoned the nobles who supported him as soon as possible, preparing to pull out an army to fight against the riot in the southern part of the kingdom as soon as possible. But before it started, Anthony stopped them. Since Harold is so enthusiastic, let them go. Those miners are not so easy to deal with. Anthony sneered. Master, is it possible that the riot of these miners is related to wizards? Hatcher hesitated for a moment and asked with a little puzzlement. He didn't think these people could make any waves. Although the Earl Joyce boasted about the so-called miners' leader very powerful, in his opinion, it was just some clever tricks. He took advantage of Joyce's unpreparedness and used some despicable means to catch the other party off guard. The untrained poor people will never be able to resist the victory on the battlefield, even with the help of wizards. After all, the miners' behavior of blowing up the goddess statue has angered the church. Cardinal Inlock even said at the banquet that he would send several archbishops and a team of priests to go together. Unless Anthony, as a great wizard, is willing to do it himself. Anthony neither admitted nor rejected it. Now was not the time to expose the secret law society and the land of wizards. Instead, he spoke ambiguously. If the kingdom is always peaceful, you may not have any advantage. Even if the church's interference is put aside, Harold's supporters are more powerful than you. Only a suitable change can reverse your current disadvantage. In short, you just need to do it, and you will naturally be able to ascend the throne when the time comes. Although Anthony didn't know much about these miners, he knew that this was the arrangement of that adult. With these hastily assembled troops alone, they must not be wiped out. Hatcher took Anthony's words as a default, and his urgency was much less. He still felt a little insecure to simply let Grand Duke Rickman and others go to the earldom of Joyce. His father, King Basil, mentioned the matter of establishing a crown prince so clearly for the first time, and in front of all the nobles in the entire empire. In addition, this matter was proposed by Cardinal Ansiuk himself, which meant that whoever could solve the problem of the miners, even if the candidate made the two dissatisfied, they could not easily regret it. If Harold succeeds, it will be difficult to deal with. Hatcher hesitated whether to organize a large army to follow the other side, pretending to go together to suppress the riot, and then temporarily turn against them, cooperate with the miners and wizards to cooperate inside and outside, and annihilate all the private soldiers of the dozen nobles who went to the earldom to crusade against the miners. Anthony was also shocked by Hatcher's ruthlessness. After pondering for a moment, he did not agree with Hatcher's risky move. Unless he could guarantee that the entire legion would be completely wiped out, he would only be caught by others. You can send a team to investigate the situation, and it will not be too late to make a decision later, Anthony said hesitantly. At the same time, the final battle was taking place in the earldom of Joyce. After playing a trick of feinting to the east and attacking in the west, Redell, who easily captured the castle, encountered the biggest problem since the uprising after solving the guards, that is, to disintegrate the local church. Unlike the baronies where only one priest was stationed, the church had a bishop and 5 priests. In addition, they made quite a commotion when they dealt with the guards, which had already alarmed the church. Therefore, it was no longer possible to cheat and attack. The only thing they could do was to fight with all their strength. This was a battle between the poor and the extraordinary. In the pouring rain, thousands of miners surrounded the church with crossbows, spears or knives they had seized. Dozens of crossbows were shot together, and the flying arrows fell like a rainstorm. However, the bishop just raised his hand, and an invisible barrier blocked the rain of arrows. The arrows shot on it and caused a lot of overflow, but they could not break through it in a short time. Although the well-made composite crossbow is not inferior to the flintlock rifle in power, it is based on the breakthrough of materials science and the invention of pulleys. The strong crossbow made by the craftsmen of the empire is not satisfactory. It is impossible to break the second-ring divine art, holy light shield, with just one round of crossbow arrows. On the contrary, the opponent's subsequent holy light impact would kill dozens of people. As for the miners who rushed up and attempted to besiege, they also knelt down on the ground crying and wailing under the light of the divine art. Confession of sins, sincerely confessing their actions of smashing statues and blaspheming God. Such a horrible scene made the miners, who occupied an absolute number of people, retreat in fear, not daring to take a step forward, and only dared to fight back with crossbows from a distance. The gap between the extraordinary and the poor can be seen. Is this a real clergyman? Retta looked at the bishop in the church who was easily dealing with their siege, and then looked at the dozens of corpses lying on the ground, tightening the long knife in his hand. He wanted to rush up and fight with everyone, but he knew very well that this would not help at all. Yes, so I told you that the real difficulties have just begun. Lin En's voice rang in his ears. The bishop stationed in the earldom should be a second-rank clergyman. Is there any way to kill him? Redell asked anxiously. 2 methods. First, you can wait until his power is exhausted. Lin En said casually. Whether it is a wizard or a clergyman, casting a spell will inevitably consume mental power. However, in the church, the other party seems to be able to receive a certain bonus. So under the protection of those priests, the power has not been exhausted for a long time. What about the second method? Redell rejected the first method without thinking. because if he waited a moment longer, several miners would die. Chapter 261. Could it be that Riddle is the messenger of God? The second way is to learn magic. Lin En said, "Magic?" Now, Riddle paused. He was naturally very interested in the very magical and powerful magic. During this period of time, Lin En would occasionally stuff a lot of new knowledge into his head, which seemed to be called physics, chemistry, and mathematics. It is said that these are the basic courses that must be learned to become a wizard. When he had free time, Riddle would also take a rough look at them a few times. This knowledge was very addictive, from the movement of objects to the formation of everything. Perhaps this is the world in the eyes of wizards. Everything runs according to certain laws, and magic is the reproduction of these objective laws. But, didn't you say before that my magic talent is very limited? Riddle asked in confusion. I'm afraid it's too late to learn magic now. I have a way to make you a spellcaster in a short time. Of course, this is an experiment, and I don't guarantee the success rate, Lin En said bluntly. Come on. Riddle took a deep breath and prepared himself for everything. Then he felt a sharp pain in his brain, as if someone was stirring his brain with a pickaxe. Although Riddle was just an ordinary person who could not do magic, after being tempered by the dream world, his will was much stronger than that of ordinary people. The discomfort caused by forcibly breaking through the mental defense line was particularly obvious. Even if Riddle himself had a certain talent for magic, it was not easy to let him gain the ability to cast spells in a short period of time. The most critical factor was where the magic power came from. Even a wizard apprentice could not cast a few first-string magics, not to mention that even the apprentice was not Riddle. Lin En chose a tricky way. He had recorded the magic he mastered in the magic field, forming a large number of spell slots. In this way, Riddle could connect with the deep spirit of the intelligent brain to release magic. This was Lin En's attempt to explore the secrets of divine arts. Just when the cracking of the mental frequency reached 50%, Riddle suddenly felt that his brain seemed to explode, and his consciousness entered an extremely mysterious realm. In a void of space, countless gray runes floated. These runes looked very complicated, and were composed of lines that could not be described in words. Riddle was amazed, and the two runes at the bottom suddenly lit up. At the same time, the corresponding information appeared in his mind, and Lin En's voice also sounded synchronously. This is the first-ring magic, lightning induction, and lightning strike. First-ring magic? Riddle was a little surprised. Lin En just said that the bishop was a second-ring clergyman. These two first-ring witchcrafts alone might not be enough to defeat the opponent? Lin En said with a smile. The strength of magic can sometimes not be simply determined by the number of rings. Some specific spells can often achieve good results with the help of natural forces. For example, now, Lin En's voice fell, and a thunderous sound rang in the sky. Remember the physical knowledge I transmitted to you, about the formation of lightning strikes? Lin En said with a smile. The reason why thunder can cross thousands of meters in the sky and hit the ground is that the electrons gather in the clouds, which increases the electric potential and forms an electric potential difference with the ground. When the electric potential difference reaches a certain level, the molecules between the clouds and the ground surface will be ionized, forming positive and negative charges, which attract each other to form falling lightning strikes. However, air is not a good conductor, so most lightning is directly interrupted in the air and cannot reach the ground. The lightning-inducing technique uses this principle to control the formation of lightning strikes by affecting the electric field on the surface of the ground. Under Lin En's explanation, Riddle quickly tried it. The effect of the first-ring technique on the electric field is very weak, but it is enough. After all, lightning always falls in the path that is most easily ionized. The next moment, under Riddle's guidance, a violent thunder exploded in everyone's ears. It was the explosion caused by lightning breaking through the air. But lightning comes faster than sound. A white beam of light instantly broke through the clouds and fell straight from the sky. However, Riddle's first spell was slightly off target and did not hit anyone. The falling lightning struck the ground, blasting a large hole in the solid masonry. Everyone present stopped what they were doing, obviously stunned by the sudden flash of thunder. God's punishment. This is God's punishment. The bishop shouted loudly, and the priests beside him were also excited. thinking that it must be their pious prayers, or the blasphemous actions of these miners, that attracted the wrath of the true God and drew the thunder from the sky. Compared with the jubilant bishops and priests, Ham and others turned pale and terrified. Some even threw the mining manuscripts in their hands on the ground and knelt down to beg the goddess for forgiveness. "Great moon goddess, please lower your anger and punish the blasphemer in front of you." The bishop was extremely excited, opened his arms and looked up at the sky, shouting loudly, "Then go to see your goddess." Riddle roared, raised his hand and pointed at the bishop, and launched the lightning attraction spell. Instantly, an extremely bright light fell again. It was the mighty power of nature. The bishop, who was spreading his arms, looking up at the sky, and praying for the arrival of God, also saw the dazzling light. The tens of millions of volts of high-voltage lightning went straight through the holy light barrier that made them helpless, and the powerful current instantly penetrated the bishop's body. Everything happened too fast. At the moment of facing death, the bishop's face still had excitement and joy. Seeing the lightning falling from the sky split the bishop into a charred corpse. This scene that seemed like a punishment from God made the priests who were praying devoutly dumbfounded. Could it be that the great Lord of the stars and the goddess of the moon had completely abandoned them? The faith of several priests showed signs of collapse, but Riddle had no intention of showing mercy. He immediately commanded Ham and others who had just woken up from a dream to use crossbows to kill the remaining priests. He used the lightning spell twice in succession. Although the magic power consumed was directly drawn from the magic field, the consumption of mental power also made Riddle's brain a little painful. The miners on the field looked at Riddle with astonishment, excitement, and shock. A thought even popped up in Ham's mind. Could it be that Riddle was the messenger of God? Otherwise, how could he summon lightning from the sky? Chapter 262 Lin En, the god of miners? Ham, take your men to search this church. Remember to destroy the statue of the goddess to avoid any mistakes. Riddle ordered despite the tingling in his brain. Then, without resting, he took the remaining people to clean up the battlefield, especially to bury the bodies of the miners. More than 40 people died in the attack on this church. Riddle couldn't help but sigh. Although he valued these clergy very much and took all the captured crossbows, the opponent's strength still exceeded his expectations. Fortunately, everything is over. After cleaning up the things here, it was already evening. Ham and his men had already counted the finances of Count Joyce. Boxes of gold coins and treasures filled the entire treasury, which was dazzling. Riddle began to act as usual, which was to gather the poor and miners of the whole town together and divide the treasures with Joyce's land. Are we really going to divide it all? Ham couldn't help but ask. When he was in the Baron's territory before, he felt a little incredible when he saw Riddle dividing the property. This was worth at least tens of thousands of imperial gold coins. Of course, according to Lord Lin, these riches were squeezed out of the poor by the Earl, and now I am just returning them to them, Riddle said very solemnly. And after a pause, he continued to speak. Otherwise, can we take all these things away? This is obviously unrealistic. Riddle knew that although he had captured the Earl's castle, they could not defend the castle with just these scattered soldiers, let alone fight against the regular army. They could only run away and move positions. Carrying these treasures would only slow down their speed. Wouldn't it be better to have extra bags to carry food and clothes? Ham was both admiring and regretful as he watched Riddle's guards open boxes full of gold and silver and distribute them to the miners and the poor. Many people were afraid to accept the kindness of Riddle and others, and even suspected that they had some ulterior motives. Riddle didn't care. Trust always takes a process. Under the temptation of real benefits, most miners and poor people chose to accept their kindness. Joyce's wealth seemed to be a lot, but many of them were treasures that could not be valued. After the rest was shared, each person could only receive about 30 silver coins. As for the miners who participated in the battle, they received a gold coin as a reward for their heroic behavior. Riddle's generosity was also the reason why these people were so morale boosted that they dared to smash the statue of the goddess. After dividing the Earl's gold and silver and bringing the two sides closer, Riddle took out his trump card, which was to hold a large bonfire banquet, where everyone gathered together to accuse the supervisors and nobles of their harsh treatment in the past. For example, Baron Elvis was greedy and stingy. He built an extremely luxurious manor, but he was only willing to give the miners who risked their lives to dig ore in the mine a few pieces of black bread and hard-to-swallow wheat porridge. Even eating half full was a luxury. Another example was a cruel official who whipped himself in public for no reason after getting drunk. There were so many similar sufferings that it would take days and nights to describe them. Those noble lords who were high above did not regard them as human beings at all. The various heavy taxes from the territory and the church almost crushed people. Just staying alive was a luxury. At first, the poor people in the earldom dared to stand far away and listen, but soon they became more and more angry, and finally joined in with curses. There were so many angry poor people that Redel had to let his guards come out to maintain order, and then ordered people to bring up all the delicacies stored in the earl's treasury. Many poor people and miners had their first taste of delicious white bread, a leg of lamb, or a little noble red wine, and experienced the luxurious life of the nobility. Lord Redel, when you were in the church today, were you summoning the divine punishment? A young miner couldn't help but ask as the bonfire banquet was going on. Ham and others also looked over. The scene in the church was beyond their cognition. The lightning fell from the sky, almost breaking their eardrums, and instantly split the bishop, who was so powerful that he was invincible, into a charred corpse. In the minds of Ham and others, only divine punishment could describe such a horrible scene. No, that's not divine punishment, it's the application of the laws of electromagnetism, Redel hurriedly explained, but everyone present was confused. What electric charge accumulation and potential difference were far beyond the scope of their brains. Most people firmly believed that Redel must have been favored by the gods. Some miners from the baronies even boasted about how Redel led them to kill the evil overseer, how he attacked the baronies at night and killed Baron Elris in his sleep, and then he marched forward with great vigor and frightened the great Earl Joy so much that he fled without even daring to return to the castle. Amid the boasting of the crowd, Redel's cheeks flushed, and his face showed a bit of youthful embarrassment. Some of these deeds were indeed his work, but many were not his credit, especially when dealing with Joyce. He lacked leadership experience and asked the mysterious wizard for advice. Even the method of calling on everyone to complain was given to him by the wizard. You must have received the guidance of the real gods, a miner shouted excitedly, since it was Redel who told them that the so-called moon goddess, Ella, was just a false god who used faith to fool them, and was no different from the terrifying and evil gods and demons in the legend, but was more deeply hidden. Redel must have been received by the real god, or received divine revelation in his dream, to know all this. Hearing this, Redel fell silent, because he still hadn't figured out who the mysterious and powerful wizard was, and why he chose him. He only knew that the other party's profound knowledge was as vast as the ocean, and he could even bestow magic on him. If the other party hadn't claimed to be a wizard, he would have thought that he had received true divine revelation like these people. However, in Redel's eyes, Lin En, who knew everything and showed all kinds of magical powers, was no different from a god, and a god who was willing to save them. The Humble Miners. Chapter 263, Redel, the Unethical Man. Amidst the angry curses against the nobles and the calls for praise for Redel, the miners from the baronies and the poor people in the castle quickly became familiar with each other and talked about everything. Obviously, the complaint method that Lin En told him was very effective. In just one meal, the hostility of most of the poor people had been disintegrated. After eating and drinking, Redel rejected the poor people and miners who wanted to join the team and liberate themselves, and asked them to think about it for a few days before making a serious decision. Although it was urgent to expand the team, he knew that recruiting too many unqualified people would only make the army loose and without combat effectiveness. You will lead the guard tonight. You must pay more attention and never take it lightly. Redel assigned a personal guard to instruct. Although the soldiers in the castle had been killed by them, it did not mean that they were completely safe. Before, he ordered people to capture and hang all the notorious rich families and small nobles in the castle. The handling was not necessarily clean, and it was necessary to guard against the remaining forces attacking at night. After arranging all the things, Redel, who had been extremely tense, finally relaxed a little. Just as he was about to go back to have a good sleep, Lin En's voice rang in his mind. It seems that you are already very experienced in doing these things. Redder had long been accustomed to the occasional voice in his mind. He was not surprised at all. He scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "This is all thanks to your guidance, Mr. Lin En." Without the miners around him, Redder took off his disguise. He was not old to begin with, but he had to pretend to be mature in order to give everyone confidence. It's just guidance. When it comes to real practice, you still have to rely on yourself. Lin En smiled and responded. Redder's performance was even better than he expected. At the beginning, he almost had to teach him the arrangements of leading operations and tactics by himself. Now, in just over half a month, he can make some arrangements on his own. But I have to tell you a bad news. The Earl Joyce you let go has fled to the palace, which means that your liberation of the miners in the southern part of the kingdom has been exposed. Lin En continued solemnly, "The army that came to attack you is led by Duke Rickman, with a total of 15,000 people, and several bishops and some priests are accompanying the army." The expression on Redell's face immediately became extremely solemn. Just one bishop caused them a huge trouble, not to mention that there were several more this time. Although the lightning spell is powerful, it can only exert extraordinary power on thunderstorms, allowing him to compete with those bishops who can cast divine spells. And it won't take many times. A regular army of tens of thousands of people can also easily destroy them. You must know that when Joyce, who was dealt with before, came to conquer them, he only brought 1,000 people, and the guards of the entire earldom were only about 2,000 people, most of whom were temporarily recruited serfs. Even so, they need to rely on cheating to win. Riddle struggled for a long time and finally sighed. "I can't defeat them. It seems that I can only hide in the mountains. This is the only way out." "No, that's not necessary. I have a way for you to defeat the Grand Duke." Lin's voice sounded again. Reddleton's eyes lit up. He had no doubt about Lin's statement. He had seen all kinds of fantastic tactics of the other party. They were very powerful and made Earl Joyce run around in circles. "I sent you some reinforcements. Of course, you still need to buy some time. About 10 days, and the legion led by Rickman will arrive in 5 or 6 days at most," Lin explained. "It is not easy to transport the entire musketeer team from Yayata to the kingdom of Hajarata, especially the transportation of artillery. It is impossible to move fast." A few days passed in a flash. The army assembled in the capital, under the shouting of Grand Duke Rickman, marched towards the earldom with great force. However, only halfway through the journey, Rickman realized how unwarlike those lowly slaves were. They not only set up many traps along the way, but also sent a guerrilla team to hide in the nearby mountains. During the day, no one could be seen. When they were ready to rest at night, these miners would suddenly jump out and shoot a wave of rockets from a distance, and then flee without hesitation, regardless of whether they hit the target or not. Although the arrows were not very accurate because they were too far away and it was late at night, they basically did not hurt many people, but they still disturbed them. These people were like rats squeaking in your ears, and when you got up and wanted to hit them, you couldn't find them. As a last resort, Grand Duke Rickman had to rescue the bishops who accompanied the army, and used divine magic to get rid of all these elusive and annoying rats, and seized 150 crossbows in one go. "What a stupid tactic. They actually sent such precious crossbows to us," Rickman sneered. He had thought that the leader of the miners was a tough character before, but now it seems that he can only use some mean tricks. An earldom can only find 300 crossbows at most, which is also the only means for the mobs to fight against them. The other party actually gave away half of them at once. It can only be described as stupid. It took almost 8 days to reach the destination. Rickman did not choose to attack the city directly, because Joyce had dug a secret passage from outside the city to the inside of the castle in order to leave a way for himself to escape. Now is the time to use it. Rickman immediately sent an elite team, together with a bishop, through the secret passage, sneaked into the city at night, opened the city gate, and even contacted the small nobles in the city to cooperate with the inside. Things went very smoothly. Less than half an hour later, the tightly closed city gate was opened. Rickman immediately led his men to charge in, but was surprised to find that all the rebellious miners had withdrawn. It was like a punch on cotton, which made Rickman very depressed. Joyce was so excited that tears filled his eyes when he returned to the castle. However, when he hurriedly led his men back to the manor to open his treasury, he saw an empty scene. All the gold and silver were distributed by Redel, and the priceless treasures were buried, leaving only 4 white walls. These despicable thieves! Joyce was so angry that he vomited blood and almost fainted on the spot. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 264, Reinforcements from the Sky. Grand Duke Rickman led the army to take a short rest in the castle. After the angry Joyce captured several people and interrogated them severely, he realized that all his wealth had been distributed by Redel to the poor in the castle. Moreover, some people followed him and ran away before they arrived. Joyce was so angry that he cursed and gathered all the poor people who were still stranded in the territory. He ordered them to return all the property they had collected and to hand over an additional 20 silver coins as punishment. Those who could not pay would be whipped. At first, Joyce personally carried out the order, beating several people to a bloody mess. He was so tired that he breathed a sigh of relief and handed the matter over to the guards to execute. Some poor people who were reluctant to give up their fields and houses, or who were not optimistic about Redel and did not obey his orders to evade for a while outside, were extremely regretful, and their resentment towards Joyce was even deeper. As for the nobles and wealthy businessmen who hid in the tunnels and dark rooms and escaped everything, they were jubilant. When Joyce denounced Redel's banditry, they even spontaneously assembled a private army of 500 people and let Joyce be the commander to kill those damned miners and take back their treasures. This was obviously a pleasant surprise for Joyce. Before, he was even considering whether to recruit some poor people to form temporary serfs, at least to strengthen his momentum, so that he would not have no manpower available and could only rely on the Grand Duke's guards. Now it is much more convenient, and it is really unworthy of the nobles to place his own army carrying hoes and mining drafts on the battlefield. At night, the spies sent out earlier reported that they found the traces of the miners more than 10 kilometers away from the castle. There were a large number of people scattered around, roughly estimated to be tens of thousands of people. It seems they haven't run far. Rickman paused and breathed a sigh of relief. What he was most worried about was that these people would break up and disappear without a trace, and he would not be able to complete the prince's request. That would be really troublesome. Keep tracking for me, but don't alarm them, Rickman said, and he did not intend to pursue them at night, but planned to rest here for a night. The previous encounter had made Rickman understand the other party's insidiousness and cunning. Chasing in the dark in the middle of the night might run into trouble again. Try to intercept the other party in the plain area ahead, and all the despicable conspiracies and tricks will be exposed. Thinking of this, Rickman shook his head and sneered. These stupid miners! If we hold on to this castle, it may take more time to deal with them. They must have heard of your reputation, so they were scared and fled in a hurry. Even if they have the strong walls of the castle as a support, they can't make up for their inner weakness. Joyce flattered. Rickman couldn't help but burst into laughter, and a group of nobles also echoed him, gathered together and talked, imagining how generously the generous Prince Harold would reward them after this victory. By the way, where is His Royal Highness the Second Prince? Why didn't I hear about his actions when I was in the capital? Listening to everyone's boasting, Rickman suddenly remembered this matter, and felt a little uneasy in his heart. This matter was related to the establishment of the Crown Prince, and the other party should be very anxious. I heard that His Royal Highness and several earls had disagreements on the deployment of the army. Maybe this is why they have been delaying it. A baron responded with a pondering voice. They are fighting at such a critical moment. His Royal Highness the Second Prince is really not suitable to ascend the throne, Rickman said mockingly, and his heart was completely relieved. Before, there were spies reporting that an earl who supported Hatra led a small army, which was far behind him. It seemed that he was unwilling to give up, So he sent people to observe their movements at all times. "Let them see with their own eyes how we crush those miners," Rickman said decisively, and then raised the wine glass in his hand. "For our victory, and for King Harold." Everyone present also raised their glasses and shouted in unison, "For His Majesty Harold." Early the next morning, when the sky was just getting light, Archduke Rickman summoned the army to chase them. In order to avoid being escaped by these people, he sent a cavalry brigade to go there first and drive them to a suitable place. Rickman had a big appetite. He not only wanted to defeat the rioting miners, but also prepared to annihilate them all in one breath. Such a hearty victory was the best gift he gave to the new king. However, things are not always as expected. Under the pursuit of the cavalry, Redl led his men to a valley and defended on the spot. It was not as Rickman expected. Due to the unfavorable terrain, the cavalry did not continue to pursue. "If we had known that we would be blocked here, we might as well defend in the castle. Maybe there would be a chance," Ham complained. Now they were trapped in this valley and couldn't even run. "That fortress belongs to Earl Joyce. No one knows if he has left any tricks. It will be more troublesome to be trapped inside and outside," Redl explained, and then said with a smile, "And our waiting is not in vain. The reinforcements have arrived, right?" "Reinforcements? Where?" Ham asked in confusion. "In the sky," Redl said with certainty. Ham and others looked up at the sky blankly, but there was nothing there. Redl didn't see anything either, but he firmly believed that the reinforcements had arrived because the wizard told him so himself. The next moment, the miners felt the ground shaking violently, and then a burst of light surged in the empty valley, and airships appeared in front of everyone. Ham and others stared at the exquisite creations in front of them, which were difficult to describe in their shallow language. Each airship was more than 20 meters high. When they recalled that Redl said that the reinforcements came from the sky, someone immediately shouted loudly, "This must be the creation of God. God has come to save us." To these miners who were in despair and had never seen magic, these airships that suddenly appeared in the valley were like God sent to save them. For a while, the shouts spread throughout the valley, and many miners knelt down to worship these huge creatures that were taller than the house. Chapter 265 Darren, my cannon is thirsty. Hey, what are they doing? Lydia was the first one to run down from the airship. She was stunned when she saw thousands of people kneeling and kowtowing to her. After hearing the shouts of the crowd, Lydia's face was a little strange. It turned out that she was the messenger of God. How could she not know? Behind her, soldiers wearing fine leather armor and holding muskets also walked down from the airship one after another. After several months of special training, in the fight and killing with monsters, these people no longer looked like new recruits, and each of them was filled with a murderous aura. Although Redl did not make a fuss like those miners, thinking that it was a gift from God, he was also shocked to see dozens of airships appearing out of thin air in the valley, and thousands of people coming down from them. Lin En naturally attached great importance to the debut of the musketeers. He brought almost all the airships made in the workshop, including the batch originally promised to the parliament. A total of 70 ships were gathered, just to transfer the entire musketeers and the artillery team from Yaiata to here in one go. Such a terrifying transportation capacity is also thanks to the alchemists who solidified the magic of wind whisper and lightness on these airships, which greatly improved the carrying capacity of this thing. This is also why it only takes 1 day from Yaiata to the kingdom of Hadrota. But Lin En asked Redl to delay for 10 days, just to wait for these airships to be modified. In addition, Philip and others who were responsible for the production of airships also came. However, they did not come specifically to help, but to test the performance of the weapons. Only in the real battlefield can the advantages and disadvantages of this new weapon be tested. Darren brought a group of halflings to move the new artillery down, and then asked impatiently, "Where are our enemies? Where are they? Where are they?" His cannons were thirsty. The direction of the airship was exactly opposite to that of the Imperial Army, so they did not collide directly. There is a cavalry team guarding outside the valley, about 1 or 2 kilometers away from here. As for the army led by the Grand Duke, there is no sign of them yet, Redl explained. "No, they are already here, and they will be here in about half an hour," Philip said very seriously, and put down a cylindrical object in his hand. This is a telescope made using the principle of glass concave and convex lenses. They also added an eagle-eye technique to the outermost lens, which can see very far away. It is much more powerful than the alchemical eyepiece invented by the Alchemy Association. I heard that Dean Lin En also planned to make a larger astronomical telescope that can clearly see distant galaxies. Where is it? This time it was Redel and others' turn to be confused. Philip smiled and handed over the telescope in his hand. Redel took it and asked how to use it. Then he put the cylindrical thing to his eyes. In an instant, his vision seemed to have traveled thousands of meters. He could even see the mottled lines on a tree. This is the magic of the combination of magic and technology. It has the effect of 1 + 1 being greater than 2. Redel sighed in his heart. Having experienced many wars in the dream world, he certainly understood how important it was to have the ability to observe the movements of distant enemies at any time. After adjusting his mood, Redel turned his head and began to search. He soon found his target. In the far distance, flags with different shapes and family emblems were flying all over the sky. More than 10,000 soldiers marched in formation. The long swords in their hands and the crossbows on their waists shone coldly under the sunlight. When there are more than 10,000 people, it is overwhelming. Not to mention these fully armed elites. No noble in the kingdom of Hadrada can have so many armored soldiers. But this expedition has gathered more than 20 nobles' private soldiers, each with hundreds or thousands of people, and they have put together this army. Redel, who was watching from a distance, felt a chill in his heart. Although there are tens of thousands of people on their side, they are sparsely positioned, and even the weapons in their hands are not neat. The power of the two is simply incomparable. I am afraid that they will collapse at the first sight. They can only rely on this reinforcement that appeared out of thin air. Redel looked at the musketeers in front of him, especially the strange long sticks in their hands. He stayed for a long time, thinking, this thing should not be as good as their hose for hitting, right? And there are only 3,500 people. Whether they can fight against the regular army of the kingdom is still unknown. In comparison, Redel is more concerned about the 70 behemoths in the valley. Perhaps this is the killer of the wizard. Can the artillery hit the target at this distance? Philip asked. It's too far. It's better to be within 1 kilometer. This way, the accuracy will be higher. Darren thought and responded. Although Dean Lin asked them to make artillery that can hit 2 or 3 kilometers away, this idea is still just a design drawing. In this case, it's not too late to wait for them to launch an attack. It's just in time to prevent them from running away. Philip nodded, and then ordered the wizard apprentices to adjust the artillery. The others also took action. Lydia and others returned to the airship, activated the polarization magic, and rose into the sky. The musketeers quickly loaded lead bullets to ensure that they could immediately fire the first bullet during the battle. On the other side, Duke Rickman led the army to the outside of the valley. After receiving the report from the cavalry, he shook his head with a sneer. Although these people hid in the valley and could rely on the terrain for defense, they also blocked their own retreat. This is simply seeking death. Just when Rickman was about to rush into the valley and start a massacre, he was surprised to find that Redel had led his men out of the valley. The miners were dressed in ragged clothes, holding long knives, broad axes, hoes and mining drafts in their hands, and they lined up reluctantly. Seeing this scene, the nobles present laughed out loud. Joyce's face was extremely ugly. He had already felt the mocking eyes of the crowd. He was so ashamed that he wanted to find a crack in the ground to crawl into. He was actually beaten by such an army and fled in panic. We'd better be careful. In such an unfavorable situation, the other party dared to come out. Most of them have something to rely on. Archbishop Nord suddenly reminded him. Before going with the army, the cardinal warned him that the riots of these miners in the southern part of the kingdom were too strange, and it might be related to wizards. Chapter 266. This is the power of technology from another world. Nord's careful reminder did not attract much attention. Joyce urged Duke Rickman to launch an attack. He could not wait to twist off the heads of those rebels. In that case, you should be the vanguard, Earl Joyce. Rickman patted his shoulder and said encouragingly, Lord Rickman, this is not good. The conquest of these miners is related to the candidate for the crown prince. The first credit should be given to others. Joyce said hesitantly. He only had a few hundred borrowed people. If he rushed too far and was surrounded by the enemy, these people would not risk their lives to protect him. If you don't have the courage, get out of the way, Joyce. No wonder you were driven out of your territory by these lowly miners, a young earl said mockingly. Johnson, you. Joyce was angry and furious, but before he could finish, the earl looked at Grand Duke Rickman and took the initiative to ask for a fight. He was willing to lead the cavalry brigade in person to crush these rebels. Okay, I'll give you 2,000 cavalry brigades, and disperse them as quickly as possible, Rickman said in a deep voice. If you fail, I think you should know the consequences. Johnson patted his chest confidently and guaranteed that the cavalry had a strong suppression power over the infantry, not to mention that his opponents were just a group of poor people holding hoes and mining drafts. As long as a group charged, the rest would be slaughtered. The rest of the nobles also looked at Johnson with envy and jealousy. Before, they didn't want to lose too many guards, so they didn't mean to compete for the first merit, but they didn't expect Grand Duke Rickman to be so generous and allow Johnson to lead the entire cavalry brigade. Needless to say, after this battle, Johnson, who got the first merit, will definitely be appreciated and rewarded by the new king. Bishop Nord, I'll trouble you next. Rickman turned his head and looked at the priests in white robes beside him, and said politely, get ready to cast the spell, everyone. Nord nodded, and put his hands on his chest. With a group of priests and bishops, made a strange prayer gesture, and chanted in a voice as ethereal as a song, Great Lord of the stars, Goddess of the moon, the creator of all things in the world, we are here to pray for your mercy and grant your humble servants endless courage and strength. A series of loud hymns resounded in the wilderness, and dazzling white light shone on everyone's body. Whether it was the nobles or soldiers present, they all felt that their bodies were full of vitality, and the fatigue of the long trek was swept away. This is the fourth ring magic, God's gift, hymn of courage. Compared with the first level divine spell, Eliminate Fear, the range of its use has been increased by thousands of times. It requires 7 bishops as a guide, and dozens of priests to work together to cast the spell. In just 2 or 3 minutes, tens of thousands of people were enveloped in the divine light of the Lord. Go, warriors of the Lord, use the most heroic battle to crush those blasphemers. The Lord will be watching you from the other side of the majestic kingdom of God. Nord's loud voice resounded on the battlefield. For the great goddess of the moon, God is with you and me. 15,000 soldiers, one by one, shouted words of praise to the Lord as if they were injected with chicken blood. Johnson took the lead and led 2,000 cavalrymen to rush towards the miners. Grand Duke Rickman also led the remaining legions to advance quickly, forming a semi-encirclement, and was bound to kill all these blasphemers here. The tremors of the horses trampling on the ground were like the sound of a fierce war drum, beating in the hearts of Ham and others. Looking at the elite cavalry bathed in white light and surging like waves, Ham couldn't help swallowing his saliva. If it weren't for the scene of Philip and others descending from the sky, which gave them a little more confidence, he would never have the courage to stand here. In the valley behind him, a row of ferocious cannons were neatly placed. Due to the limited carrying capacity of the airship, only 50 were brought over this time, and the apprentices of Yaita College were responsible for operating these cannons. Alok, Pierce, Johnny and others were quickly calculating the wind speed and distance in their minds, and building mathematical models in their minds to draw parabolas. All this sounds very complicated, but it only takes a dozen seconds for the apprentices to calculate. After mental calculation, Johnny was the first to light the fuel line, and then Alok and others also completed the calculations. Cover your ears, Alok shouted loudly, but the people present could no longer hear it. The fierce roars directly overwhelmed the tremors caused by the horses trampling the ground. It was the roar of artillery. It was the power of technology from another world. Huge shells whizzed in, and the fierce artillery fire was heard clearly even by Grand Duke Rickman, who was hundreds of meters away. Sure enough, it's a wizard. Nord's expression became very solemn in an instant. He obviously regarded the roar of artillery as some kind of powerful magic, but he quickly comforted him. Don't worry too much, Grand Duke Rickman, I have already considered this. The 4-ring magic just cast has a strong effect of breaking magic. Under the protection of the Lord's divine light, Those weird witchcrafts can't play much role. Rickman's nervous expression suddenly relaxed a little, just as he was about to shout for God's gift. Continuous artillery rain had already fallen from the sky. Not far in front of them, a cavalryman who was charging was unfortunately hit by a cannonball head-on, and the whole person was directly smashed into pieces. The shockwave and the dust that exploded threw the cavalryman around him to the ground, and the splashing blood and mud directly stained Rickman's luxurious clothes. Tragic scenes were staged in every corner of the battlefield. Rickman was stunned for a moment, and looked at Bishop Nord with a sullen face. "Is this what you call the magic breaking and divine light protection?" Nord was also stunned at this moment. He could naturally see that this magic that was specially used to resist magic did not play any role at all. Could it be that the believers of the evil god have developed a witchcraft that can circumvent the protection of the magic? Nord's face also became a little ugly, but he still said firmly, "It seems that these believers of the evil god are more powerful than I thought, but they can't hold on for long. Such powerful magic must consume extremely terrifying magic power. It's not possible that there is a whole army of wizards hiding behind the valley, bombing indiscriminately, right? This is inside the kingdom. There is no way so many powerful wizards could sneak in." Chapter 267 The Battle Songs of Blood and Fire and the Roar of Artillery. At this moment, on the battlefield where blood and fire intertwined, 2,000 fully armed cavalrymen were galloping, but they were hit by continuous artillery fire. Almost every minute and every second, several or even dozens of artillery shells would fall beside them, or even on their heads. Cavalrymen kept falling off their horses, and the psychological pressure brought was extremely huge. If it weren't for the divine art, ode to courage, that gave them extraordinary psychological endurance, the entire night brigade would have collapsed and fled under the bombardment of several rounds of artillery fire. Even if people could bear it, the horses under them couldn't. Even so, the galloping artillery fire was still wearing away their courage bit by bit. Although the power of the fourth ring magic was extremely terrifying, it was dispersed to 15,000 people, and only the level of the first and second ring magic was left on them. These damn wizards. Johnson had a trace of fear in his mind, fearing that the next moment the artillery fire would fall on his head. He and Nord regarded such a terrifying rain of artillery as wizard magic. "Charge! Don't stop!" Johnson shouted loudly. Although he was afraid, he knew that once the cavalry began to charge in groups, they could not stop rashly. All they could do was rush over as fast as possible and defeat them all at once. With such a powerful magic, accidental injuries were also extremely serious. The only way to be safe was to rush into the ranks of the miners. "God is with me." The knights around also roared in excitement, but their voices were faintly trembling. At this moment, the miners facing them in front suddenly scattered to both sides. Johnson's pupils shrank slightly, because hidden behind them were thousands of musketeers wearing exquisite armor and holding flintlocks. Stepping, raising guns, pulling bolts, thousands of people moved in unison, without a single unnecessary movement. This was also the thing they had trained the most in the past few months. As for the cavalry rushing towards them, no one was afraid and no one hesitated. After all, how could this compare to the terrifying tide of corpses and the terrifying beasts? The next moment, dense gunfire rang out, and the cavalry brigade that surged like a tide was like hitting a solid wall head-on. More than 200 cavalrymen in front fell to the ground instantly. The refined armor on their bodies did not provide much protection, and was easily penetrated by the ultra-high-speed lead bullets. The neighing and tragic wailing of the war horses rang out one after another, and the cavalrymen who fell off their horses in the front row also caused more casualties. Johnson, who was at the forefront, was also the first to be hit by the musket, but the divine barrier surrounding his body saved his life. This was a gift he received for his bravery in a certain crusade, and it was also his reliance on daring to lead the way. However, this layer of divine barrier that could protect against crossbow arrows had cracks at this moment. Johnson didn't care, and there was only one thought in his mind, that is, to rush over, especially when he saw those enemies holding strange long sticks. They did not continue to shoot. Johnson had already seen the dawn of victory. Obviously, this powerful weapon could not be used continuously. However, The slight joy only lasted for a few seconds, and then I saw the musketeers in the front row put their weapons in the back row and replaced them with new ones. There are many ways to use the three-stage musket attack. In ancient times, both the East and the West summed up their own routines. They can be roughly divided into the Japanese three-stage attack in which the front and back rows exchanged muskets, the front row fired and the back row loaded, and the Ming and European three-stage attack in which the front and back rows rotated to shoot. These two methods have their own advantages and can adapt to different battlefields. This time, there is no need to retreat and detour, so the musketeers use the former method. With the constant rotation of the flintlock in their hands, a continuous rain of bullets shot out. Although the destructive power and deterrence of the muskets are not as terrifying as artillery, there are more of them. The distance of just tens of meters is like a road of death. Every time the concentrated fire is fired, hundreds of cavalry will fall down. The amulet that Johnson hung on his chest burst as early as the second round of shooting arrived. Fortunately, he escaped the third round of shooting, but was still shot in the abdomen in the fourth round. Fortunately, his armor was special and blocked most of the damage. Johnson was almost knocked off his horse by the impact, but he finally stabilized his body and endured the piercing pain. He only had the obsession of rushing over to kill those damn miners and the wizards who cast spells. Not to mention that he couldn't stop at all now. He was less than 10 meters away from the front row of the musketeers. It was too late to turn his horse's head at this time. "Charge! Charge!" Johnson roared hoarsely, and then he saw that the musketeers in front of him actually pointed their guns at him. It was not until then that he realized that there was nothing around him. He turned his head and saw that the cavalry brigade with heavy losses had already fled in all directions. He was the only one who rushed to the musketeers. Before Johnson had time to curse, he was shot into a sieve by more than a dozen muskets and fell only 5 or 6 meters away from the musketeers. Rickman, who was watching this scene, felt that his heart was about to break. He didn't care about Johnson's life or death, but he felt very sorry for the fallen cavalry. You have to know that these 2,000 cavalry were not all his strength, and Prince Harold's personal guards were also added. The loss this time was so heavy that the prince had to tear him apart, fire back with arrows, and cover the cavalry to withdraw. Rickman shouted angrily. The charge and sacrifice of the cavalry were not worthless. At least they covered them under the attack of artillery and reached the distance where they could use arrows and crossbows to fight back. However, after witnessing the tragic situation of the cavalry, the army of more than 10,000 people had already become a mess. Seeing that the situation was not good, several nobles were ready to take people away. The priests on the field tried their best to use magic to appease the army, so as not to let the army completely collapse. Only Rickman's personal soldiers obeyed the order faithfully. Just after shooting a wave of arrows, the continuous artillery hit their heads. "Stop shooting! Stop shooting! Stop!" Rickman, who was afraid of being targeted by artillery fire, quickly changed his mind. "It seems that we overestimated them. These people are simply a pile of loose sand." At the same time, Lin En's figure appeared in front of everyone. But it is true that this legion was originally a temporary assembly of dozens of nobles' personal soldiers. It would be a miracle if they could command and enforce orders at will. It is okay to fight with favorable winds, but once against the wind, everyone will take care of themselves. The fact that they can withstand the attack of artillery and the volley of muskets without completely collapsing is entirely the credit of divine arts. Chapter 268 Nord. The great Lord will use the fire of purgatory to burn everything. The sudden change in the situation made Redel, Ham and others stunned. They could not see the scene of the artillery fire in the valley, but could only hear the continuous sound of artillery fire. However, they saw every move of the musket team clearly. These people just held something like a long stick in front of them and pressed a small pull ring. A burst of fire burst out with a loud noise, and then the fierce cavalry fell off their horses one by one. "Sir Lin, what kind of weapon is this? Is it the power of magic?" Redel asked curiously. "No, it should be said that this is the power of technology," Lin said with a smile. "Technology?" Redel paused for a moment, with a blank expression on his face. "Yes," Lin nodded. "In fact, to put it bluntly, whether it is a musket or a cannon, it is just throwing stones with more force." Ham, who was eavesdropping on the side, became very strange. He felt that this mysterious adult must be joking. How could such a powerful weapon be associated with throwing stones? Philip and the others also had a look of tears and laughter on their faces, but they could not refute Lin's words. After all, what the other party said was right. The principle of the musket was to use the impact force generated by flames and explosions to throw stones. How about it? Did you see anything? Lin asked with a straight face. The number of people in the musket team is still too small. If those cavalrymen had not retreated just now, they might really rush over, Orlando said in a deep voice. The effective range of the flintlock is only about 80 to 90 meters. For the cavalry, it is just a matter of charging. If it weren't for the double deterrence of artillery and muskets that made those people lose their courage, it would probably cause considerable casualties. The firing rate is the biggest disadvantage of this thing. It would be great if it could load 2 or even 3 rounds of bullets at a time, Orlando said with emotion. Philip shook his head. He thought that this flintlock was already a perfect creation. If it could fire more, wouldn't a skilled gunner be more powerful than many wizard apprentices or even first-ring wizards? Don't panic. Those followers of the evil god won't be rampant for long. The great Lord of the Stars is watching us from the disadvantages of the kingdom of God. Those who died bravely will receive eternal glory in the kingdom of God. On the other side of the battlefield, Grand Duke Rickman shouted loudly, trying to maintain the order of the army, but his voice was trembling slightly, and it was obvious that his heart was not as calm as it seemed. Rickman was in a difficult situation at the moment, because this action was related to the throne. When he assembled the army to go south to attack, he reorganized the troops with the mentality of a lion fighting a rabbit. He not only brought a group of nobles' personal soldiers, but also a cavalry of 2,000 people. Such a force is more than enough to deal with a small minor riot, even as the main force to conquer a kingdom. Who would have thought that among those ragged miners, thousands of well-trained regular soldiers with strange weapons suddenly emerged, and his cavalry regiment was beaten to pieces. There were also wizards involved, bombarding them with magic. The cavalry brigade that fled in panic finally returned to the queue successfully, but at the cost of nearly half of them being killed or injured. Most people died from the blows of muskets and artillery, but many fell under the trampling of teammates and collisions when fleeing. Seeing the miserable state of these people, Joyce's forehead was covered with cold sweat. Fortunately, the reckless Johnson saved him from the disaster, otherwise he would be the one dying on the battlefield now. But before Joyce could rejoice, Rickman had grabbed his collar and said viciously, "Earl Joyce, is this the minor riot you told me about?" So many wizards and a legion of thousands of people appeared in the earldom at the same time, mixed with those rioting miners. As the Lord, Joyce could not be unaware of it. And now think about it, how could a few unorganized miners drive Joyce, the Lord, out of his territory? It was clearly the followers of the evil god who provided help behind the scenes. Joyce did not mention any of this intelligence. Rickman could not help but suspect that the other party was a spy sent by the second prince. No wonder that prince was sitting firmly in the capital and did not look anxious at all. The nobles present wanted to skin Joyce alive on the spot. Facing the questioning of the Grand Duke, Joyce was speechless. After all, he really knew nothing about the forces behind this group of miners. Now is not the time to ask for a punishment, Rickman. Let's find a way to end this battle first, and then slowly settle accounts after returning, Archbishop Nord said in a deep voice, and the priests behind him set up a solid divine barrier to block the incoming artillery fire. But they obviously could not take care of every place on the battlefield, and could only protect a small area in the center of the battlefield. The sound of artillery fire continued, and Nord was also anxious. Could it be that the magic of these wizards was unlimited? Rickman pushed Joyce away in anger, and then calmed down and asked solemnly, "Bishop Nord, do you have a way to use magic to eliminate the wizards hiding in the valley? This is the key to breaking the deadlock." As for the musketeers holding strange weapons, after the initial shock, Rickman soon realized a shortcoming of this weapon, that is, the range is less than 100 meters. Once the cavalry brigade crosses this distance, the weapons in their hands will no longer be able to break through the armor, and the musketeers will immediately stop shooting. The effective throwing distance of the longbow is about 130 meters. They can fully take advantage of the long-range throwing of bows and arrows and use bows and arrows to fight back in places where the opponent cannot reach. Then the shielded heavy infantry slowly advanced, settling in front to attract the attention of these people, and the remaining cavalry of more than 1,000 people attacked from both wings, driving away the miners, forcing them to squeeze the musketeers inside and disrupt their actions. Rickman, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, was undoubtedly sharp. After calming down, he quickly thought of a way to deal with it, but the most important problem was to stop the round bullets that kept flying from the valley. Otherwise their longbowmen would not be able to stand at all. Nord thought about what kind of magic could cross a distance of hundreds of meters and still retain enough power. We can beg the Great Lord to bring down the Last Judgment and burn everything with the eternal fire of purgatory, but we need some time to get the Lord's mercy, Nord said slowly. Chapter 269. This is at least a fifth ring, no, even a sixth ring magic. Move. They move again. Redder, who was always paying attention to the battlefield, noticed the enemy's movement at the first time. The army in front, which was originally in a mess, gathered again. Thousands of shield soldiers formed neat rows, like a solid wall, and slowly advanced forward. Continuous rain of arrows flew over again. Then, a melodious hymn resounded on the battlefield. It seems that these bishops are not giving up, and are preparing to do something new. Lin En frowned. From the information he got, the cardinal should still be in the capital. Only a few ordinary bishops and a whole group of priests came with the army this time. However, it seems that they are not so easy to deal with. The powerful magic that covered the whole field just now can give us some clues. Lin En guessed that it should be some kind of magic that can enhance the will to fight. Otherwise, when the artillery sounded and the muskets fired, the horses under the feet of the cavalry would have been frightened and ran around. However, it is obviously not an easy thing to use more powerful power. The previous hymn lasted for more than half a minute. We must not let them use it again, Lin En said solemnly. High-level magic and divine arts can completely dominate the outcome of a local war, except for the 3,000 musketeers who are well trained. The rest are just refugees. Once attacked, they are likely to collapse on a large scale, which will affect the performance of the musketeers. Do we need to mobilize the gunners to concentrate firepower? Philip asked. No, let them keep an eye on those longbowmen. Lin En shook his head. The number of artillery is limited, and those longbowmen are the only few forces that can threaten the musketeers. Does that mean we have to use that? Orlando said in surprise. It's just right to try its power. Lin En nodded, and then a fireball condensed in his right hand and sent it into the sky. At the same time, hundreds of meters in the sky, 70 airships were floating above the battlefield. On the leading largest airship, Lydia was lying on the edge of the cab, using a telescope to observe the battle situation below. When she saw the charging cavalry brigade falling down in rows like wheat being cut, she couldn't help but curl her lips. What's the situation? The halflings asked eagerly. This alchemical telescope was still a new thing. Each airship was equipped with only one, so they could only wait for Lydia to report the battle situation. These people are too weak. They are all scared, Lydia said quite depressedly. This meant that the new things they prepared might not be useful. Darren rolled his eyes. He had personally seen the power of the artillery. Anyone facing this thing would be scared to death. Suddenly, a burst of fire shot up into the sky, interrupting the conversation of several people, and a brilliant spark exploded behind the airship. Lydia's expression immediately became extremely excited. This was the signal agreed upon by Lin En and them. Hurry, 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 I'll do it myself. Lydia jumped down from the stool, ran to the driver's seat, pulled the joystick, and drove the airship over the priests. Darren and others brought a cannonball the size of a human head, stuffed it into the drum, and soon fell into the bottom cabin along the pipe. Fire, Lydia shouted loudly, slapping her palm heavily on the button. Almost at the same time, the cabins at the bottom of 70 airships opened with a bang, and countless cannonballs fell from the sky, accompanied by bursts of fire, and then exploded in midair. Countless dots of fire appeared in the air, swaying white fireworks all over the sky. On the other side, Grand Duke Rickman was dispatching and directing the army to put pressure on the other side to prevent the other side from focusing all its firepower on this side. The sound of gunfire rang out again, and Rickman's heart was suddenly clenched. But when he saw the black bullets flying towards the crossbowman as he expected, he was relieved. However, a guard beside him shouted in fear at this time, "Look at the sky! Fire rain, it's fire rain!" Rickman and others looked up at the sky together, and sure enough, dots of fire were falling from the sky. Nord and others who were chanting and praying to the great Lord to send down the fire of purgatory were all excited. Could it be that the wrath of God has finally arrived? But they didn't seem to have received a response from God just now. Nord was wondering, and soon found out that something was wrong, because these flames were actually flying towards them. "It's the magic of the wizard," Joyce shouted in fear, and woke up everyone present. A solid protective barrier appeared above everyone's head, but it was the protective magic that Nord and others had set up before chanting and casting the spell. Sparks with white smoke slowly fell on it, making a sizzling sound. That was the sound of the divine barrier being gradually corroded. The soldiers who were not in the divine protection range could only watch the sparks falling from the sky and falling on themselves. "Don't panic. This is just a means for the enemy to intimidate us," Rickman shouted loudly. According to his judgment, although the rain of fire this time was very wide, it was just some sparks that fell. It was very likely that the enemy wanted to make them lose their composure. But as soon as he finished speaking, a series of screams resounded on the battlefield. Soldiers were constantly hit by the so-called sparks and then fell to the ground and kept rolling. Some even took out their armor on their own initiative, just to dig out the white phosphorus fire that had penetrated into their flesh. A round of shrapnel attacks almost covered half of the battlefield. Whether it was the shield soldiers who were moving forward or the crossbowmen who were pulling their longbows to shoot, they were all hit without exception. More fire rain fell from the sky, the thick white smoke, the pungent smell, and the soldiers who were running and rolling to extinguish the white phosphorus fire formed a path to hell. This horrific scene almost made Rickman fall off his horse. Even the loud hymns had stopped. Nord and others looked at the nightmare-like scene in front of them in horror. The protective magic they had set up before had been corroded into holes, and the fire rain was falling along these holes. Such a terrifying range, such a terrible power. This is at least a fifth ring magic. No, it could even be a sixth ring. This must be a fifth ring magic meteor shower. Great wizard. It's a great wizard. Retreat, retreat. An archbishop shouted frantically. Although they could barely perform a fourth ring magic together, they had no chance of winning against a real great wizard. Chapter 270. Our real enemy is the one who is high above us. God, hell has come. God, please save your devout believers. On the chaotic battlefield, shouts and screams intertwined, and some people even knelt down to pray, hoping to be saved by God. But everything was in vain. Rickman and others were targeted in the direction where they were, and 10 airships bombarded them non-stop. Those nobles who were high above and fantasized about how to please the new king before the war, now only had regrets in their hearts, wishing that the war horses under their feet would grow 6 legs and lead them to escape from the coverage of the rain of fire. Joyce was no exception. Seeing that the situation was not good, he took his own soldiers and fled. Even so, he could not outrun the rain of fire that fell from the sky. Stars and dots soon fell on him, some of which fell on the solid armor, and some of them penetrated the gaps between the armor and drilled into his body. A severe pain and burning sensation surged into his heart, causing Joyce's face to twist, but he forced himself to hold it back. The desire to survive overcame everything. The miserable state of those soldiers before had clearly told him that this kind of fire could not be extinguished by ordinary means. Now the only way was to escape from the coverage of the rain of fire first and then find a way to treat the wound. Joyce endured the burning pain, but the war horse under him was the first to be unable to bear it. It let out a shrill neigh and threw the earl off with all its might. Then the war horse twisted its body and rode away without looking back. "Horse, my horse!" Joyce was dizzy from the fall and shouted at the top of his lungs. He tried to get up from the ground with his hands and feet, but a hand grabbed his thigh tightly and dragged him back. Joyce turned around in horror and found that Grand Duke Rickman was right behind him. He had obviously fallen off his horse, but he looked even worse than him. His back was covered in blood and flesh, as if he had been trampled by a warhorse. Joyce. You bastard, shameful betrayer, Hatcher's running dog. Rickman's eyes were red and his expression was ferocious, as if he wanted to eat Joyce alive. Let go, let go. At the critical moment of his life, Joyce didn't care about the other party's identity and kicked Rickman's head in panic. Rickman grabbed Joyce's thigh tightly and wouldn't let go. His spine was broken. Now that the bishops and priests were busy, it was impossible for him to escape the coverage of the rain of fire. Even if he successfully escaped to the capital, this shameful defeat would be enough to ruin his reputation. After all, more than 10,000 armored soldiers and 2,000 cavalry brigades were almost half of the elite forces of the kingdom. Whether it was the king, His Royal Highness the Grand Prince, or the Church, there was no way they would let him go. In Rickman's opinion, all this was caused by Joyce's intentional concealment of information about the wizard. Even if he died, he would drag the other party down to hell together. Get out of my way, Joyce shouted frantically, pulling out the long knife from his waist and cutting off Rickman's right hand that was holding his thigh. During this delay, the next wave of fire rain had already floated down from the sky. Go to hell with me, Joyce, Rickman shouted frantically. You are the one who should be damned. Joyce dragged Rickman over and prepared to use the other's body as a cover to avoid this wave. How could Rickman let him succeed? The two nobles wrestled on the battlefield and were swallowed up by the falling fire rain together. What a terrifying power! In the distance, Philip couldn't help but exclaim at the battlefield covered by thick smoke and flames. Although they had experimented with the power of this weapon with Warcraft before and had a general understanding of its effect, they had never thought that this thing would be so terrible when used on humans. As the commander of the musketeers, Rowan was also very emotional. He didn't believe that a war could end without any casualties. The scene in front of him was undoubtedly the best proof. Lin En gave him a real lesson on how to fight a war when he had absolute firepower. However, these weapons were a bit too terrible. This is war. Kindness to the enemy is often cruel to yourself. Lin En's face remained unchanged. Obviously he had expected it. White phosphorus is somewhat inhumane, but it is the best way they have to hit the opponent's morale. Lin En didn't know what kind of magic the priests were preparing, but since these people did not choose to retreat, it must mean that Grand Duke Rickman believed that they still had the possibility of defeating them. In this way, even if they can win in the end, they will inevitably suffer heavy casualties. Sir Lin En, are we going to pursue now? Redell asked hurriedly. He didn't really fight many battles, but anyone with a discerning eye could see that now was a good opportunity to pursue and expand the results of the war. Several wizards didn't seem to have any intention of giving orders, which made him somewhat anxious. No, there is no need to chase them. Some of the cavalry have already escaped. I'm afraid we can't stop them from passing on the situation here to the capital. Lin En shook his head and refuted. The most important point, which he didn't say, is that these smoke are highly poisonous. Before the smoke clears, if you step into it rashly, you may not even know how you died. This thing can't distinguish between friend and foe. Moreover, most of the army has been lost, and there is no possibility of fighting again. Fear will always be rooted in their hearts. Now it seems that this war is not as difficult as the speakers think, Orlando said in a relaxed tone. In the past, when the wizard meeting was held in Greenreel, the speakers all looked worried, as if the wizard land was about to be in great trouble. Some people even suggested whether to find a new paradise on the sea in case of emergency. Now it seems that the empire is nothing more than a few more people, which is nothing great. If they put all the more than 20,000 new troops in the wizard land into service, these people are just chickens and dogs. Presumably, this victory will greatly boost morale. Don't be too careless. We just caught the enemy off guard this time. The subsequent battles may not be so easy. Lin En reminded. More importantly, their real opponent is not these soldiers with swords, guns, bows and crossbows, but the one who is high above God. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 271, The Great Defeat That Shocked the Capital. Lord Gad, does His Royal Highness the Second Prince want us to follow him? Grand Duke Rickman has already led his men to fight against the miners. It is estimated that they will return victorious soon. In a wilderness several kilometers away from the battlefield, a knight saw his Lord Earl walking so slowly and couldn't help asking, "Fighting against the rebellious miners is a great achievement for free. Are they just going to give it up? What can we do? We only have so few people. Can we still rob them?" Earl Gad sighed helplessly. His Royal Highness the Second Prince only gave him 1,500 people. With such a small number of people, he couldn't do anything. He didn't even dare to get too close to the battlefield, for fear that the Grand Duke would suddenly turn his guns and directly kill their 1,000 people, and then push the blame on the miners. Don't think this is impossible. When it comes to the fight for the throne, if there is a chance to eliminate dissidents, the other party will never let it go. Gad sighed for a while. He really couldn't figure out what the prince was doing. Even outside the capital, Hatri even gave him a very absurd task. Suddenly, everyone present felt the ground shaking violently, and then the sound of fierce artillery fire came from a distance, even several kilometers away. The battle is so fierce. Gad was also a little surprised, and then thought that the bishops might be performing some powerful magic, and it seemed that the outcome would be decided soon. Just as Gad thought, a closed and dark crowd appeared on the horizon in the wilderness in the distance. These should be the defeated miners, right? Gad thought so, drew the long sword at his waist, and the knights and guards beside him also clenched their weapons together. With excitement on their faces, unexpectedly, Archduke Rickman brought so many elites, but he couldn't wipe out all the miners. But this is a good thing for them. Cut off a few heads of miners and bring them back. This trip is not in vain, and they can also give an explanation to the higher-ups. Wait. That seems to be the Duke's army. A sharp-eyed personal soldier suddenly found something wrong. Gad paused, and then he realized that some of the fleeing people were wearing armor with the kingdom's logo printed on them. They couldn't be miners, and he was very familiar with the one rushing in the front. It was the Marquis Sen of the kingdom. More than 10 days ago, the other party led his personal soldiers to follow Duke Rickman to fight. He still remembered the high-spirited look in his heart. However, at this moment, the Marquis of the kingdom had completely lost his previous noble demeanor. His whole face was covered with blood, his clothes were tattered, and he was in a mess. The soldiers following behind looked even more miserable. Almost everyone had disheveled hair, their armor was damaged, and they kept shouting, "Hell, hell has come, the great Lord has abandoned us, God's punishment, this is God's punishment." Lord Seren, what happened? The horrified Gad hurried forward to stop the other party and asked, rain of fire everywhere. The army was defeated. Earl Johnson is dead, and Grand Duke Rickman is finished. It's the Great Wizard. The riot of these miners is related to the Great Wizard. Sen saw Gad, as if he saw a savior, and said with a pale face, he saw Grand Duke Rickman fall off his horse with his own eyes, and he was probably in danger now. After Sen's constant narration, Gad finally figured out what happened. A great wizard with terrifying strength appeared on the battlefield and released an extremely powerful magic, which caused the defeat of the legion. Defeating a legion with his own strength, Gad couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. What a terrible power this must be. Hurry, those demons may catch up at any time. Escort me back to the capital. What happened here must be reported to His Majesty and the Church immediately. Sen grabbed Gad's arm tightly and said anxiously, "Don't be so anxious, Lord Seren. Where is Bishop Nord? Are they behind?" Gad pulled Sen's hand off his arm and asked again. Sen shook his head in fear. They seemed to be targeted by the Great Wizard. The fire rain had been chasing them. An archbishop was hit in the head by a huge cannonball that came from nowhere. Blood splattered and he died on the spot. So they had no choice but to flee in all directions to have a glimmer of hope. If that's the case, then it's easy. Gad's eyes flickered, and he said with regret, "I'm sorry, Lord Seren. I'm afraid I can't send you to the capital, but I can send you to see the Duke." Hearing this, Sen's face suddenly changed. but Gad had already swung the long sword in his hand and chopped him on the head, and a stream of blood immediately spurted out. Sven's body slid down a little bit and fell off the horse, with an expression of disbelief on his face. "Go, kill them." Count Gad raised the bloody sword and pointed it at the soldiers with uneven armor behind Sven, shouting loudly. Those who could follow Gad to inquire about the situation were all his and Prince Hatcher's private soldiers, and they would execute even the most outrageous orders without hesitation. After a brief confusion, a massacre began. The soldiers who followed Sven to escape all the way had no idea that they had just escaped from the hellish battlefield, and they were betrayed by their own people again. Moreover, they had already thrown away their heavy weapons in order to escape. They had no ability to resist at all. It was futile to escape. No matter how fast they ran, they could not run faster than arrows and crossbows. Gad waved the long sword in his hand and harvested soldiers one by one. This was the secret order given to him by the second Prince Hatcher. He wanted to keep these people here as much as possible to weaken the power of the church in the first Prince Harold. In his opinion before, this was completely a fantasy. How could those miners compete with the regular army of the kingdom? What kind of waves could they make? Now the facts tell him that this is more than just waves, it is simply a landslide and tsunami. After the fourfold slaughter of artillery, muskets, rain of fire and Gad, Rickman finally led 15,000 elite soldiers to attack the miners. Only more than 20 cavalrymen escorted Archbishop Nord and fled back to the capital in a hurry. At the same time, the news of the great defeat quickly spread throughout the capital. Chapter 272. The Panic of the Kingdom and the Nobles. Hadjarata. In the palace, King Basil was holding a routine meeting to discuss this year's taxation issue. Soon, he received a report from his servant. Archbishop Nord was outside the palace and had something very urgent to see. Before King Basil could reply, Harold smiled and said, "It seems that this war has already ended." "Where is Grand Duke Clyman? Didn't he come back with him? Isn't he still strangling the hidden miners in the earldom?" At this point, Harold turned his head triumphantly and looked at his brother Hatcher. He wanted to see the helpless and furious expression on his face, but he unexpectedly found that Hatcher also had a smile on his face, as if congratulating him on becoming the next king. The servant lowered his head and did not answer Harold's question. "Please bring the person in," Basil said in a deep voice. He had already keenly realized from the servant's reaction that things might not be that simple. The palace door opened quickly, and Archbishop Nord walked into the hall quickly, with a bit of fear on his face. There were more than 20 knights with uneven armor, covered in dust and blood. This time, even Harold, who was slow to realize it, realized something was wrong. "My Lord Bishop, what happened? Is it that the situation on the front line is not good?" Harold asked anxiously. The worst situation he could think of was that Archduke Rickman was ambushed by those miners and suffered heavy losses, and then the Archbishop ran back to the palace for support. "There is no front line now, Your Highness Harold. Archduke Clyman is dead, and several marquises and earls have not been able to escape. I'm afraid there are only a few of us left to fight against more than 10,000 miners." Nord shook his head bitterly. When Clyman fell off his horse, he was by his side. After hesitating for a second between rescuing him and protecting himself and bringing the information back to the capital, Nord decisively chose the latter. "After all, this news is too important. Clyman is dead? All 15,000 elite troops are wiped out?" Upon hearing these two pieces of news, Harold's mind was confused and he almost fainted. The nobles present were also shocked and unbelievable, and almost suspected that the bishop was joking with them. For this battle for the crown prince, the followers of the eldest prince have brought out their best strength. In addition to more than 10,000 private soldiers and 2,000 cavalry, there are also the help of church priests and bishops. When these people gathered outside the capital before, everyone was a little worried that the other party would suddenly turn their guns around and stage a palace coup. Who else can destroy such a powerful army? Even King Basil, who was sitting on the throne, couldn't help but stand up, his eyes wide open, looking at Nord and the knights below like a lion. "You must be lying. This is impossible." Harold's eyes were red, and he stretched out his hand to grab Nord's collar tightly, roaring hoarsely, Those lowly slaves holding hoes and mining drafts will never be able to defeat my personal army even if they use the most despicable means. It's a pity, but that's the fact, Your Highness Harold." Nord struggled to break free from Harold's restraints, and then, under the gaze of everyone, he told everything that happened on the battlefield a few days ago without missing a word. The knights next to him also stuttered to add that they had personally experienced the tragic scenes of being attacked by muskets, artillery and white phosphorus bombs. Although they escaped from the battlefield by chance, the hellish scene was engraved in their hearts, so when they told the story, they inevitably exaggerated it a bit. For example, when they were charging, a large group of well-equipped regular troops suddenly jumped out from the ragged mining slaves, holding extremely powerful magic weapons in their hands, which seemed to be able to control the power of thunder and fire. They only heard thunderous sounds, and their companions fell down and rose like wheat being cut. The rain of fire was even more terrifying, just like the hellfire in the endless abyss in the Bible. Once infected, it would be like a maggot on the tarsal bone, burning people to death. The story told by Nord and more than 20 knights made everyone present shudder, but there were also doubts. "Archbishop Nord, you just said that the group of rebels who suddenly appeared were as many as thousands of people, and everyone had a magic weapon? Those evil god believers hiding underground, I'm afraid there are not that many together," a kingdom noble said doubtfully. "Although it is rumored that those wizards have been bewitched by the devil and evil gods, and have unimaginable power for ordinary people, it is not surprising that they do terrible things, but they are not a group of fools who are easily fooled. Even some nobles have had some contact with those wizards who mastered magic in private, and can clearly distinguish between alchemical items and magic. Moreover, no matter how powerful a wizard is, he has his limits. How can he cast spells for more than 10 minutes without stopping?" The voices of doubt continued, and even intensified. But there was a hint of panic in these voices, because they didn't want to believe that this was true, so it could only be a lie. "I dare to swear to the Lord, everything I said is true. There is absolutely no lie." Nord's roar was deafening, suppressing all the voices of doubt in the hall. "A clergyman is willing to swear in the name of God, which means that it is impossible to be lying." Nord's angry words shattered the last fantasy of the crowd. "This means that their enemies have destroyed nearly half of the kingdom's elite troops led by Duke Clyman with a nearly complete victory." The entire hall fell into a deathly silence, and the fear spread like a plague in the hall. Clyman and so many elites were all defeated. If the other party came to the capital, wouldn't they have no choice but to be killed? Harold was even more devastated, standing stiffly in the hall. All his soldiers and supporters were killed or wounded in the war, and he knew he was doomed. King Basil's face was also pale, and he staggered and fell on the throne behind him, making people suspect that he would faint in the next moment. "Your Majesty," the servants on both sides wanted to step forward to support him but were stopped by Basil. He forced himself to look at Nord with a trembling body and said in a trembling voice, "What about Cardinal Enruck? Has he heard the news?" Chapter 273. "Do you dare to swear to the great Lord?" "I have sent someone to inform the Cardinal." In response to King Basil's inquiry, Nord said in a deep voice. 2 priests also fled back with him. Because the situation was too urgent, they were directly divided into 2 teams, in order to report the news as soon as possible, and the church in the kingdom would discuss solutions together. In addition, I suspect that a great wizard was involved, and even planned this riot of miners behind the scenes, trying to overthrow the entire kingdom. Nord added, because the terrifying rain of fire that covered the whole scene at the end might be the fivering magic meteor shower, but he had never seen this thing, so he was not completely sure. The nobles present had completely fallen into panic and fear, and some even proposed to ask the Empire for help. Their strength alone was far from enough to deal with this rebellion. Amid the calls one after another, King Basil was hesitant. Although the kingdom of Hadrada is a vassal of the Empire, it still maintains a high degree of autonomy due to historical reasons. Once he decides to ask for help from the Empire, the other party will definitely take this opportunity to station troops in the kingdom, so that all his efforts to consolidate the royal power for most of his life will be in vain. Hatra is also unwilling to be interfered with by the Empire. After all, The survival of this group of miners is directly related to the position of Crown Prince. Although the forces under Harold, as a competitor, have been mostly lost, this righteousness is still very important. Thinking of this, Hatra hurriedly stood up and spoke loudly. "Father, I don't think it is necessary to ask for help from the Empire. Things are not so bad." Grand Duke Clyman was just caught off guard this time, and his mediocre ability has led to the loss of the elite forces of the kingdom. "I am willing to lead the army myself and go with Cardinal Ansiuk to solve the rebellion of the miners," Hatra vowed. Hatra's words surprised everyone in the hall. Nord and the knights had made it very clear that Grand Duke Clyman was not trapped, but was defeated by the rebels in a nearly complete victory. A total of 15,000 people were wiped out, and even the Duke could not escape. This means that the enemy's terror is far beyond their imagination. This is simply a pit of fire, and now Hatra actually wants to jump into it. Some smart people quickly came to their senses. When they discussed the crusade against these miners half a month ago, Hatra had been dragging his feet and not taking any action. Now he is very active, which is obviously abnormal. "Wait, Your Highness Hatra, when Bishop Nord reported just now, you didn't seem to be surprised," a court minister suddenly asked in a cold voice. Harold also reacted immediately, and instantly thought of the mocking look that Nord looked at him when he entered the door. A chill surged from the soles of his feet to his heart, but more of it was anger. "Hatar, it's you. You must have colluded with those evil god believers to plan this riot of miners so that you can be put on the throne." Harold roared angrily, and then turned his head to look at the Basil kingdom on the throne. "Father, the spies I sent to monitor Hatar reported that there are often a group of unidentified people wearing strange clothes entering and leaving his mansion. Most of them are the evil god believers." Hatar's face did not change, and he said sarcastically, "Stop your groundless fantasies and suspicions. Harold, why don't you say that the entire kingdom has been occupied by the evil god believers? The matter of conquering the miners is related to the position of Crown Prince. You didn't seem to be anxious at all before." Harold sneered and counterattacked without any hesitation. "I'm not as impatient as you, Harold. A few days ago, I had some conflicts with the Marquis of Vichy on the matter of conquering those miners, so I delayed it for some time. I had to send Count Gad to find out the situation first." Hatra said slowly, paused, and then sighed and continued, "As for now, Count Gad may have been killed by those mobs. Do you dare to swear to the great lord that the riots of the miners and the wizards who appeared in the earldom have nothing to do with you?" Harold said viciously. He knew that Hatra must be lying. Everyone in the hall looked at Hatra with questioning eyes. After all, the nobles who conquered those miners this time were all loyal followers of Harold. If they died, Hatra would be the one who benefited the most. Under the questioning eyes of everyone, Hatra's forehead was sweating coldly. Swearing in the name of the true God, this is not a joke. But he knew even more clearly that once the matter was exposed, what awaited him would be the most severe judgment from King Basil and the Church. "Of course, I dare to swear to the great Lord," Hatra said calmly. "Like all of you, I only heard about the miners mentioned by Earl Joyce half a month ago. Before that, I had no idea. Otherwise, I would have died in the endless hellfire under the punishment of the Lord." Hatra's voice was very firm, without the slightest wavering. After all, he was not lying. Half a month ago, he knew nothing about this matter. It was all planned by Master Anthony. "Then," Hatra said triumphantly without waiting for Harold to continue questioning, "Father, please allow me to lead the troops in person and destroy all these rebels and evil god believers who are ravaging the kingdom. I will discuss this matter with Lord Enluck before making a decision." King Basil's words became much colder, and then he announced that the meeting was over, and took a few guards and Bishop Nord, hurriedly left the palace, and rushed to the church. Hatra was stuck in confusion. He couldn't understand why his father rejected his proposal. Was there anyone more suitable than him? What made Hatra even more anxious was that King Basil's attitude became particularly strange, which made him puzzled. When Rickman was gathering troops outside the capital to show off his power, he heard from a bribed servant that Basil smashed his favorite vase in anger. Hatra also understood his father's reaction very well. His brother not only won the support of nearly half of the nobles in the kingdom, but also had the help of the church. He was even more powerful than the kingdom itself. Although the kingdom suffered a lot of losses in this battle, it was not necessarily a completely bad thing. At least some unstable factors in the kingdom were eliminated. But now Basil's reaction made Hatra feel extremely confused. There is someone who may be able to answer his question. Chapter 274. We might as well break into the palace and seize his throne. After the routine meeting in the palace, Hatra rushed back to the manor without stopping, and ordered people to invite Anthony over. He immediately told the whole story of the meeting, and then asked in confusion, "Master Anthony, what is going on? Why did my father change his attitude so suddenly?" After listening to Hatra's story, Anthony thought about it and soon had a guess in his mind. If they had only defeated the army of Grand Duke Rickman, the kingdom of Basil would certainly not have such a big reaction. But now it is different. The tens of thousands of troops and dozens of nobles who went to the earldom were all slaughtered. Not only did it seriously affect the balance of power within the kingdom, but the power they showed naturally made His Majesty the King feel terrified. But this is exactly what Lin En wanted. If he didn't show off his muscles, how could those fence-sitter nobles believe that they could fight against the powerful church? It seems that my previous predictions were a bit wrong. Your good father is probably not going to help you to the throne, but just regards you and me as a bargaining chip to balance the power of the church. Anthony shook his head and sighed. He had underestimated King Basil, who had ruled the kingdom for decades. Anthony originally thought that the other party was dissatisfied with the church's excessive interference in secular affairs, so he was determined to put Hatra, who had a tendency to rebel against the church, on the throne. But judging from the reaction of His Majesty the King now, things were not as simple as he thought. Basil just wanted to use their power to weaken the power of the church and strengthen the royal power, and he did not really mean to fall out with the church. Under Anthony's explanation and analysis, Hatra's pupils shrank slightly, and his heart was cold. He did not want to believe this, but thinking of his father's reaction in the hall, he had to believe it. This time, Harold's expedition against the group of miners was defeated, and nearly half of the kingdom's elite forces were directly lost. Although the enemy's strength was far beyond expectations, his good father did not pursue any punishment, and did not even reprimand Harold. The bias was obvious. "Master Anthony, what should we do now?" Hatra panicked. In the past, he only needed to think about how to please his father and hope that he could help him ascend the throne. But now this idea has failed. "It depends on your followers, whether they support His Majesty Basil or you, the new king," Anthony said calmly. Hatra paused, his eyes flickering. Of course, he could understand what Anthony meant, but he couldn't make up his mind for a while. Facing great nobles like Rickman and Joyce and supporters of Harold, he could order the slaughter without hesitation. But when it came to the real rebellion, Hatra was a little hesitant. Seeing Hatra's hesitation, Anthony reminded him, "Now is the time when the resistance in the kingdom is the weakest, and it is also the best time for you to ascend the throne." The death of Rickman and dozens of other nobles means that the faction loyal to the church in the kingdom has suffered an unprecedented blow. If Hatra can seize the opportunity at this time and deal with those wavering nobles, he can directly take over and seize the throne by physical means. In addition, your defense and reaction in the hall have revealed a lot of flaws. There shouldn't be much time left for you and me. Anthony continued to add, "The wizards can stay safely in the palace, not only relying on the help of the second prince, but also the acquiescence of King Basil is also a very important factor." However, the situation is about to change 180 degrees. Hatra's face changed again and again, thinking of his efforts and flattery, but in return for his father's indifference, his eyes became more fierce, and he had made a decision in his heart. The fight for the throne can often only end with victory or death. If his brother Harold succeeds to the throne, there is no possibility of letting him go. "Master Anthony, I have a question. How many wizards did you send out to destroy the legion led by Grand Duke Rickman?" "How many great wizards were there?" Hatra asked calmly. "I think you probably misunderstood. Just these 10,000 people are not enough for wizards to step onto the battlefield," Anthony said proudly. "The ones who took action were just some ordinary soldiers who held alchemical creations and had undergone some simple training." Hatcher was shocked. Whether it was the report of Nord and others in the hall or the secret report sent by Gad, the information on them was enough to be described as exaggerated. Hearing that the whole sky was covered with fire rain, the thunderous roar was enough to break the eardrums. Rows of soldiers kept falling down, and the whole battlefield was like purgatory. Could this really be done by just some ordinary people holding alchemical creations? Archbishop Nord swore that there must be an extremely powerful great wizard who appeared on the battlefield and carried out a shameless sneak attack on them. When he first heard this information, he thought that Anthony had personally taken action, but after asking the spies, he learned that the great wizard had not left the capital. Without such power, what can we use to fight against the church and the empire? Anthony sneered and said. Anthony's words undoubtedly gave Hatcher reassurance, so that the second prince had an illusion that the empire and the church were just like this. Fortunately, Hatcher was not dazzled by such fantasies, but asked the second extremely critical question. After I succeed to the throne, what kind of grant do you need? Of course, it is to allow wizards to walk openly in the secular world. As for the rest, just like before, magic belongs to wizards, and the secular belongs to the kingdom. Anthony said with a smile, of course, it would be best if we could have a part of the territory that belongs exclusively to us. Okay, no problem, Hatch agreed without hesitation. Although the territories directly under the royal family are not many, when he ascends the throne, he will have to clean up a few ignorant guys, such as the Rickman family that has lost power, take back the territory and find a few more to confer titles. Hatcher was not too worried that these wizards would cross the river and burn the bridge. After hundreds of years of propaganda by the church, the idea that wizards represent evil is deeply rooted. The other party needs to rely on them to survive in this kingdom, not to mention that there is also a common enemy, the empire and the church. Thinking of this, Hatcher discussed the plan to seize the throne with Anthony. Chapter 275 Lin En, I am the ignorant one. In the southern part of the kingdom, in the territory of the Earl of Joyce, the wealthy merchants and small nobles who were looking forward to the triumphant return of Grand Duke Rickman never expected that Redel, who would be crushed by the army in their eyes, would come back with a large group of people the next day. This time, Redel had no intention of holding back. He confiscated the houses that needed to be confiscated and cleared out the rioters that needed to be cleared out. After a few days of tossing and turning, he finally occupied the entire territory. The subsequent actions to take over various towns and villages were also very smooth. The private armies and resistance forces of the local nobles often lost their ability to resist after a few rounds of flintlock shooting. In the kingdom of Hadra, the territorial claims and annexation wars between nobles were not uncommon, and the earldom had experienced several wars in the past. No matter which army it was, once it entered the territory, the soldiers would inevitably carry out burning, killing and looting, and sometimes they were more brutal than bandits. So the poor closed their doors and even abandoned their homes to flee. But they soon discovered that this group of people holding strange long sticks were an exception. After looting the nobles who had resisted with their troops, they not only did not ask them for anything, but even planned to distribute food, silver coins and lend to them. It was just like a dream. However, many people insisted that this was all a means for the other party to deceive them, in order to trick everyone into the square and then slaughter them. The rumor was broken after a few days, because those poor people who had the courage to receive money and food were still alive and well, and the guards had no intention of stopping those who were ready to leave the village with money and food. Everyone realized that this might not be a scam. Could it be that their devout prayers moved the great Lord of the Stars, Ella? So he sent the messenger of God to build the world into a paradise. Countless rumors spread in the territory. After a few days of getting along and communicating, the poor people and miners and the earldom gradually understood that these musketeers holding strange long sticks and able to use the power of fire were not from heaven, nor were they messengers of God. Instead, they came from the land of wizards, a holy land without kings and nobles, ruled purely by wizards. Wizards are undoubtedly a symbol of evil in the Sekha's empire. It is rumored that these degenerates who worship evil gods and are bewitched by the devil will kidnap children, dig graves, spread diseases and plagues, and curse those they hate. They are the collection of all evil. Old York, a member of the musketeers, sneered at the nonsense of these fools. Why don't you think about it carefully? Will the devil's followers distribute food, wealth and land to you? And what have the church and the nobles done for you? These people only let you stay in the land and mines all day long, working hard day after day, and then reward you with a few pieces of hard-to-eat black bread. In the end, who is the devil's believer? The poor people present were all stunned by the question. If it weren't for the grievance meeting a few days ago, they would only think that all this was a test from the gods for themselves, so that they could enter the kingdom of God and enjoy glory in the future, instead of falling into hell. And those noble lords are high above because they were chosen by God, given noble blood, and it was God's grace that allowed them to be the managers of the earth. It's different in Yalta, Old York said proudly, looking at these poor people who bowed their heads and kept silent, and an inexplicable sense of superiority surged in his heart. There are no nobles or churches there. Most people work in workshops. Everyone can eat delicious bread and camel meat. Old York talked endlessly about the magic of Yalta. The workers in the workshops can make exquisite glassware from the sand on the ground, and make wood into paper that is whiter and hundreds of times more useful than parchment. Moreover, the wizards only need to wave their hands, and the soil will pile up automatically, and soon a house will be built. Then do you want to do farm work? Where does the food come from? A poor man couldn't help but ask loudly. Yes, but we are different from you. Those alchemists have developed a machine that can automatically cultivate the land. Only one person can cultivate a 2-kilometer long and wide land in 1 hour, Old York said with certainty. Although he had never seen this machine, his brother's nephew was fortunate to be the first to experiment with this machine. Everyone present looked at each other, thinking that Old York must be bragging. Not to mention one person. Even if 10 people were exhausted, it would be difficult to finish so much work. But they were very interested in the novel scenes that Old York said. The doubts one after another made Old York curl his lips. It was indeed a wild area outside the wizard's land, and there was no knowledge at all, whether you believe it or not. This is the fact. Old York, after a pause, announced another extremely important news. In addition, tonight, Lord Lin En said that he would conduct an experiment in the territory to make the night as bright as the day. The poor people were confused about who this Lord Lin En was at first, and then they started to discuss. Could it be that he was going to make a very, very big bonfire? It couldn't be that he would take down the sun? For the wizard's experiments, they thought of dark and weird ones, such as reviving skeletons or drawing strange and weird patterns on the ground to summon the devil. In view of this, most people chose to stay indoors at night, but there were also many curious people. An open space in the earldom was soon surrounded by people, staring at Lin En and others in the center with wide eyes. Under the light provided by the torch, they could see a lot of strange alchemical instruments that they had never seen before. For this experiment, Lin En got the latest generators and connected a very simple light bulb with a thin copper wire. Since there is electricity, the related electrical technology must be mentioned. The most representative one is undoubtedly the electric light. Lin En searched the entire wizard land but did not find tungsten ore, but unexpectedly found a substitute. The reason why tungsten can be used as the best material for filaments is that it has a high melting point. The temperature of the filament when it emits light is as high as more than 2000 degrees Celsius. At such a temperature, ordinary metals have melted, while the melting point of tungsten is about 3400 degrees Celsius. The second is that it has a large resistance and poor conductivity. Under the condition of equal power on time, tungsten generates more heat than other metals. Finally, the chemical properties are stable and the antioxidant capacity is strong, which makes the life of the bulb very long. If it is well made, it can be used for decades. There are not many metals that can meet these conditions and are cheap and large in quantity. This has been a headache for Lin En for a long time, until Philip reminded him that he could try the hair of the fire lion. When he heard this suggestion, Lin En's expression was extremely strange. Using the hair of a creature as the material of the filament, isn't this funny? However, after the experiment, Lin En was immediately ashamed. He was the ignorant person. The strangeness of the magical creature was beyond his imagination. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.